Tonight, we explore a second chance for Eddard Stark, a world where the man who died, kneeling on the steps of the great sept of Baelor, woke again in his own bed at Winterfell, on the morning the world had not yet broken. He remembered everything: the execution, the children's faces, the war that swallowed the north. Every death he could not prevent, and every lie he told himself was not a lie. He woke knowing every player and every piece and every move on a board that had already beaten him once. And yet, knowing the game is not the same as winning it. Ned Stark was not built to play at shadows and fire. He would have to become something he'd spent his whole life refusing to become. He would save his family. He would save the realm. And the saving would cost him the only thing that had ever made him worth saving. This is the story of what might have happened if Ned Stark was reborn with all his memories. Winterfell, the morning before, 298 SC. He woke gasping, not the way men woke from nightmares, the lurch, the clinging to the bed's edge, the settling back when the dark resolved into familiar walls. He woke gasping the way a drowned man broke the surface, lungs seizing, the body demanding air with the urgency of something that had been without it. He sat upright in the dark, and he breathed, and the breathing was the most important thing that had ever happened. He was alive. He knew, immediately and completely, that he should not be. The great sept of Baelor, the crowd, Joffrey on the scaffold above him, the boy's face doing the thing that Cersei's face never quite managed, the cruelty worn openly, not as armor, but as pleasure. Ilyn Payne with ice in his hands, the ancestral sword of the Starks, turned against the man who had carried it. Sansa in the crowd screaming. Arya somewhere he couldn't see. And then nothing. The specific nothing that followed the moment of ice. Until this. He looked around. Winterfell, his chambers, his bed, the furs Catelyn had put on the bed when the cold started coming in October, the fire his steward had built in the hearth, the window showing the Winterfell yard in the grey pre-dawn, the castle in its ordinary morning state, not burning, not ruined, the towers intact, the walls unbreached. He looked at his hands, both of them, 10 fingers. The left hand that had taken a wound at the Tower of Joy, and that had ached in the cold ever since. It ached now, the familiar ache of scar tissue in winter. He pressed his palms against his face. The beard, the calluses, the line of the old cut along the jaw from a training session at the Eyrie when he was 15 and had not been paying attention. He was himself. He was himself at Winterfell in 298 AC on the morning before Robert Baratheon arrived. He knew this because he remembered this morning. He had lived it once already. The ordinary morning of a lord who expected an ordinary day, before the gates opened and the king's procession filed in, and the world turned in a direction it could not be turned back from. He had spent that first morning in the practice yard. He had come in for breakfast. He had watched his children watch the king arrive with the specific, stark stoicism that Catelyn always said was training, but that was more temperament. He sat in his bed with his hands on his face, and he did not move for a long time. The fire popped. The sound grounded him. A fire popping was a real thing. A real thing in a real room in a real castle with children who were alive in it. He counted them. Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Rickon. He counted them because the counting was necessary, because the knowing and the counting were different, and only the counting made it real. They were here. They were alive. They had not yet become the things he had watched them become. The king who marched south. The queen who endured. The girl who became a ghost. The boy who fell. Bran. He was out of bed before the thought completed itself. He did not know what day the climb was. He knew Robert was arriving today, And he knew Robert's visit lasted weeks. And he knew somewhere in those weeks his son had climbed a tower he should not have climbed, and found something he should not have seen, and been thrown from a window for the seeing. He did not know which day. He did not know which tower or which specific window or which morning Bran had decided that a closed tower on a morning his parents were otherwise occupied was the obvious next thing to climb. He put on his boots and his cloak without lighting a candle and went to the corridor. Bran's room was 3 doors down. He opened the door without knocking. Bran was asleep. 8 years old, the covers pulled up, one arm around a pillow with the specific Bran quality of a child who had never quite been still even in sleep, always a foot off the edge, always reaching for something. He lay in the door, and he looked at his son, and he felt the thing that had no adequate name, which was the love of a man who had watched someone he loved die, and who was now looking at them alive and unbroken. He pulled the covers back from the foot of the bed, tucked in the foot, closed the door. He went to the yard. He stood in the yard in the pre-dawn cold, and he looked at the towers around the castle's interior, the broken tower in particular, the one with the scaffolding that was supposed to be a repair project and that had become instead an excellent climbing frame for children who were curious about heights. He looked at the broken tower, and he thought about what needed to change before a boy who loved climbing found a reason to climb it. He had until Robert left. He had perhaps 3 weeks. He had been given 3 weeks to prevent the thing that had set every other thing in motion. Not much time, but more than he had when the sword came down. He went back inside. He did not go back to sleep. Catelyn. What she saw in him. Catelyn noticed at breakfast. She noticed at breakfast because she always noticed. It was the thing he had always depended on and occasionally resented, Catelyn Tully Stark's attention, which was comprehensive and warm, and occasionally like living inside a lamp. She noticed things about him the way she noticed things about Winterfell's household, which was everything that was different from yesterday. He was different from yesterday. He ate carefully, not with the ordinary Ned care, the lord at the head of the table deliberateness that was Stark table manners, with something underneath it, a watchfulness, as though each piece of bread was a decision that required monitoring. He looked at the children too long. He looked at each of them and held the look, and then moved to the next one. And Catelyn had spent 17 years learning what his ordinary looks were. And this was not ordinary. "Did you sleep?" she said, when the children were occupied. "Well enough," he said. She held the word, enough. Not well. Enough. In 17 years, he had said, well, when he meant it, and nothing when he didn't. "The king arrives today," she said. "Yes. You should look less like a man going to his own funeral." She said it levelly. A joke. Not a wound. The specific Catelyn register of a woman who had been married long enough to know which things were funny and which were real. He looked at her. The look lasted exactly 1 beat too long. "I'm thinking about the preparations," he said. She had been married to Ned Stark for 17 years. She knew every version of his face. She knew the face he wore in the Godswood, and the face he wore in the Great Hall, and the face he wore in council, and the face he wore in their bed. She knew the face he wore when he was lying, which was rare but recognizable. The face was too still. The way a man's face was still when he was working to keep it still. He was lying about the preparations. She did not push. She had learned in 17 years that pushing Ned Stark before he was ready to be pushed produced nothing useful, and occasionally produced the Ned silence that could last days. She would wait. She would watch. She would know when the thing he was carrying became too heavy to carry alone. "Bran," she said instead. He was asking about the broken tower again. Ned set down his cup. "He's not to go up there," Ned said. The voice was flat and certain in a way that was wrong for a broken tower that had been a minor Bran issue for months, something that had produced a dozen variations on "not yet, Bran," without this particular register. "He asks every week," she said carefully. "I know." He looked at her. "Tell Jory. Tell him I want eyes on the tower during the king's visit. The scaffolding is unsafe, and I don't want it happening while Robert's here. The liability of a climbing accident with the king in residence." He looked back at his cup. "Have Lewin write it up as an official restriction. Something formal that the boy can point to. So it's not about what he wants." Catelyn held this. It was, she recognized, a very good solution to a very minor problem. It was also a completely disproportionate solution to a very minor problem. Jory, Lewin, an official restriction for a child who climbed things and who had not actually climbed the broken tower yet. She said, "All right." She filed it with the other things she was filing. The king arrived at midday. Robert, the dead man walking. The procession came through the gates, and Ned stood at the head of his household, and he watched his oldest friend ride through, and he felt the ground shift under him in the specific way of a man encountering something he had not adequately prepared for. He had prepared for Cersei. He had prepared for Joffrey. He had prepared for the children's faces at the reception, the formal meeting of royal and northern courts. He had not fully prepared for Robert. Robert Baratheon rode in on a horse that was managing his weight with difficulty, and he was fat in the way that men who had been very physically powerful became fat when the power had nowhere to go. The fat of a man who had simply continued eating at the rate of his younger body without the battles to burn it. He was loud. He was warm. He leaned from the horse and gripped Ned's arm in both hands with the grip of a man who was genuinely glad to see him. Genuinely, without performance. He was going to be dead in a year. Ned had to stand there and receive the embrace of a man who was going to be dead in a year, and who didn't know it and who was right now simply happy to see his oldest friend. And Ned had to produce something that looked like happiness in return. He produced it. He had never in his life been required to produce an emotion he didn't feel and present it as though he felt it, and the producing cost him something he couldn't name yet, something small but real, the first withdrawal from an account he hadn't known he had. "You've gotten old," Robert said, holding him at arm's length. "You've gotten fat," Ned said. Robert laughed. The full Robert laugh. The laugh that had made men follow him into hopeless battles, because a man who could laugh like that could not possibly be on the wrong side of anything. He was going to be dead in a year. "Old friend." Robert clasped his shoulder. "It's good to see you. Gods, it's good." He looked around at Winterfell, the yard, the walls, the grey northern sky. "I'd forgotten how much I hated the South." "You hated the South 5 minutes ago in the King's Road," Ned said. "You said so 3 times. I say it constantly. Nobody listens." He squinted at Ned. "You look like you haven't slept." "I slept," Ned said. "You look like a man who slept but didn't rest." Robert shrugged. The Robert shrug. The enormous dismissal of an enormous man who had decided to move on from a thing. "Show me the crypts. I want to see her." Lyanna. Of all the things Ned had prepared for, he had prepared for this least. The crypt. What Ned carried down with him. Aye. They went down to the crypt together, as they had always gone down. Just the two of them. The torches in the brackets. The stone kings watching from their alcoves, with their stone wolves at their feet. The cold of the crypt was a different cold from the cold of the yard, the geological cold, the cold of things that had been stone for a very long time. Robert crouched at Lyanna's statue. He had brought flowers, winter roses, blue, the same roses he had brought the first time. Ned remembered the first time so clearly now, remembered standing here and watching Robert grieve in the way Robert grieved, which was completely and without embarrassment, and thinking, he loved her. He really loved her. I have been telling myself the story of Robert's love for Lyanna was partly pride and partly war, and now I am watching a man who is still carrying a dead woman like a weight in his chest after 15 years, and I understand it was real. He had thought that the first time. He was thinking it now with a different understanding, which was, Robert had loved Lyanna. Lyanna had loved Rhaegar. The war had been fought for a woman who had not needed to be saved, and in the gap between what Robert believed and what was true, 3 kingdoms had burned, and a dynasty had fallen, and a boy had been born in a tower in Dorne and was currently at Winterfell calling himself a bastard. Jon. Jon was in this castle. Jon who wasn't his bastard, but Lyanna's son. Jon who had died beyond the wall in another life and been brought back by something that Ned did not understand and that he was not going to think about while standing in the Winterfell crypts with his oldest friend. Jon, who was a Targaryen, who did not know it, who would not know it unless Ned told him. He had been thinking about whether to tell Jon since before dawn. He had not decided. She should have had more years, Robert said. His voice was rough. Not the rough of a man performing grief, the rough of a man in which grief lived as a permanent resident, the way cold lived in stone. Yes, Ned said, I would have made her happy. He said it with the specific certainty of a man who had never quite examined the claim closely. She would have. It would have been different. She would have been queen. Ned looked at the statue, Lyanna's face in stone. The sculptor had done her well enough. The strong jaw, the eyes that in life had been grey and fierce and always slightly ahead of the room. Not how he remembered her quite, but recognizable. He knew things about Lyanna that Robert didn't. He knew she had chosen. He knew the tower in Dorne was not a cage, but something more complicated. Not a cage, but a secret. A woman and a prince and a ceremony and a child. And the dying had not been a betrayal of Robert because Robert's claim on her was never what Robert believed it was. He said none of this. He had said none of it in the first life, and he would say none of it now. Because the second life was not the moment to reopen a wound this old and this thoroughly infected. She'd have liked it when you were the man you were at 17, Ned said. Before the throne. Robert looked at him sharply. That's not kind. You asked once what I really thought. I'm telling you. I didn't ask. Robert stopped. He almost smiled. The old smile. The one from the Eyrie before anything was decided. The boy Robert underneath the king. You're right. She'd have hated what I became. She'd have tried to fix it, Ned said. And I'd have ruined it anyway. Robert stood, his knees cracking with the specific resentment of large men's joints getting older. We were doomed regardless. Maybe, Ned said. Robert looked at him. What's wrong with you? Robert said. I've been here an hour. You look like a man with a secret he can't put down. Ned looked at his oldest friend's face. He said, I'm tired. It was a long night. Robert held the look for a moment. Right, Robert said. He put his hand on Ned's shoulder. Come on, I need wine. This place is too cold for grief. They went back up. Ned went last. He stood for one moment alone in the crypt with the statue of his sister, and he said the thing he had not been able to say the first time. when he had been too busy carrying her son through the King's Road and building the lie that would keep the boy safe. "I'm going to do it differently," he said. "All of it, I promise." The stone said nothing. The cold said nothing. He went up. Joffrey. The first look. Joffrey was 12. He was blonde and well-formed, and had the Lannister colouring without the Lannister intelligence, and when he rode through the gate behind his father, he held himself with the complete authority of a boy who had never once been told no, in a way that held. He looked at Winterfell with the evaluative eye of a prince assessing a lesser holding. He looked at Robb with the evaluative eye of a prince assessing a potential rival. He looked at Sansa with the evaluative eye of a boy who had learned, from the adults around him, that girls existed in a certain category. Ned watched all three looks. He was remembering the scaffold. The boy on the scaffold in the purple tunic, overriding Sansa's plea, overriding every counsel he'd been given, choosing cruelty over policy because the cruelty was more satisfying. Choosing the act that had ignited everything, Robb calling the banners, the war, the dead, because he had the power to do it, and no one had built in him the understanding that power existed for any purpose beyond its own exercise. He was 12. Ned kept looking at the boy's face and trying to find the 12-year-old inside the monster he remembered. He was there, barely, in the uncertain moment when Robb extended his hand and Joffrey had to decide whether to take it in the presence of his father. He took it. Robb shook it. The moment passed. But in the deciding, in the half-second before the decision, Ned had seen it. The boy underneath, the one who wanted to do the right thing, and had been given so few models for what the right thing was that he'd built a model from the worst material available. It did not produce sympathy. It produced information, which was more useful. Sansa was curtsying to Joffrey with her face, doing the thing it did when she was performing correctly and feeling something else, a brightness that was half real and half constructed. The Sansa face that she had shown to Ned 100 times when she was managing an occasion. Ned watched her watch the prince, and he felt the lurch of a father who knew what this led to, and who would not, could not, let it lead there again. He would not let Sansa go south. He didn't know yet how he would prevent it. He had no plan formed. He only knew the outcome of the alternative. That night at the feast, Cersei sat at the high table and watched everything with the attention of a woman who was always watching. Ned watched her watching. He knew what she was. He knew what she had done. Jon Arryn, the investigation, the poison through Lisa. He knew what she would do, given the space and the opportunity and the threat, the boar hunt, the wine, Ned's own arrest. He sat at the feast, and he watched Cersei watch Robert, and he felt the specific revulsion of a man looking at a beautiful face that was also the face of everything that had gone wrong. He ate. He drank. He performed the feast. Afterward, Littlefinger arrived. Littlefinger, the second look. Pater Baelish had not been expected. He had ridden up with the retinue 3 days after Robert's main procession, not announced, not in any official capacity, simply present in the way that Littlefinger was always simply present, appearing in rooms as though he had always been in them, and the question of how he'd arrived was not worth raising, because the arrival was clearly inevitable. Ned saw him across the great hall, and felt something cold that was not the castle. The first time he had met Littlefinger in King's Landing, had taken Littlefinger's hand as an ally, had trusted him and been walked to his death with Littlefinger's knife still warm from Ned's own throat, the dagger pointed at him. "The eye did warn you not to trust me," said, with the Littlefinger smile that sat in his memory now like a coal. Pater Baelish was perhaps 34 years old. He was trim and well-dressed, and had the smile that was warm and communicative, and that gave nothing away. because the warmth and the communication were the performance, and the nothing given away was the man. He held a cup of wine. He was talking to someone Ned didn't know, a minor lord from the south, probably part of Robert's retinue, and the talking was the specific Littlefinger, talking of a man who was simultaneously fully present in the conversation and fully occupied elsewhere. He looked up and met Ned's eyes. The smile was immediate and genuine in its performance. He raised the cup. Ned crossed the hall. "Lord Stark," Littlefinger said, "I hope the intrusion is forgiven. I had business in the region, and the king's invitation included discretionary retinue." "You're welcome at Winterfell," Ned said. He said it evenly, in the voice that was the Lord's voice, the hosting voice, the voice that had nothing personal in it. Littlefinger held the look for a moment. Something in the look was slightly off. Ned could see it, or thought he could. The slight recalibration. Littlefinger was very good at reading rooms and reading people, and what he was reading in Ned's face right now was not the Ned Stark of his memories, the honourable northern lord who could be relied upon to play chess, while Littlefinger was playing a different game entirely. He was reading something else. Ned made sure the something else was not threatening. He made sure it was simply different, the look of a man who was tired and preoccupied, not the look of a man who was watching. "How was the journey?" Ned said. "Long," Littlefinger said. "The King's Road has not improved in my absence." He sipped the wine. "Lord Stark, I hope we might find time to speak. About Jon Arryn." The name landed in the air between them like a stone in still water. Ned kept his face still. "What about him?" Ned said. "He was a good man," Littlefinger said. "A good hand. He left some unfinished business. Business that I think you, specifically, might want to know about, given your position as the new hand, when the king asks you, as he inevitably will." Ned looked at him. He knew what the unfinished business was. He knew it completely. Jon Arryn's investigation, the lineage book, Joffrey's parentage. He knew it the way he knew the rest of it, first hand, having died in its consequence. "I haven't been asked yet," Ned said. "You will be." The smile, warm, certain. "And when you are, you'll find yourself in a city that's considerably more complicated than Winterfell. I've navigated it for 15 years. I could be useful to you." Ned held the look. He knew the offer immediately. The exact offer Littlefinger had made the first time, slightly rearranged for an earlier meeting. The country lord who didn't understand the city, and the city man who would teach him. The teaching also the lure into the position where ending him was easiest. He knew what Littlefinger was, what he'd done to Jon Arryn, what he'd done to Ned, what he planned. He couldn't let him know that. "That's generous," Ned said. "Not generosity," Littlefinger said. "I have an interest in stability. The realm is more stable with a competent hand who knows its machinery." He held the cup. "Besides, Catelyn is an old friend. I have a fondness for the happiness of old friends." The last line was exactly what Ned remembered. Old friend, the Catelyn claim, the specific leverage that Littlefinger used on the Tully loyalty, the suggestion of a history that was partly real and mostly constructed into something it had never been. "I'll remember the offer," Ned said. He walked away. He walked to the far end of the hall where the fire was, and he stood with his back to the room for exactly 30 seconds, and he controlled his breathing and his hands and his face. He counted. When he reached 30, he turned back to the hall. Littlefinger was talking to someone else. The smile was the same. Ned went to find Jory Castle. Jory, the first instrument. Jory Castle was not a complicated man, which was why Ned trusted him. He found him in the barracks yard running the evening drills, calling out corrections with the patient economy of a man who had been doing this for years and who understood that the corrections were the work, not the obstacle. Ned waited until the drill finished, and then he took Jory aside. "I need something specific from you," Ned said. "And I need it without explanation." Jory looked at him. He had Ned's trust and he knew it, and the knowing was the thing that made him worth the trust. He didn't push at it or test its edges. "My lord." "Peter Baelish." The man with the dark goatee who arrived with the tail of the king's procession. He waited for the nod. "I want to know everything he does during this visit. Who he speaks to. Where he goes. What letters he sends and who receives them." Jory's expression didn't change. He had the Cassell family quality of a face that processed what it was given without broadcasting the processing. "Quietly," Ned said. "Not officially. I don't want him to know he's being watched." "Understood," Jory said. "And the tower restriction on Bran. I want it formalized by tomorrow morning. I want it in writing, and I want Bran's minder to have it, and I want you specifically informed that if Bran is seen in the vicinity of the broken tower scaffolding during the king's visit, I want to know within the hour." Jory's professionalism held. "Yes, my lord." "One more thing." Ned looked at the yard, at the sky over the yard. "Rob's training. I want to expand it. Tactics, not just swordsmanship, military history, decision-making under pressure. I want you to arrange sessions with Sir Roderick, not drill, something more complex." Jory was quiet for a moment. This last one was unusual enough that even Jory's professional face showed a faint question. "He's 17, Ned said. "He'll be a lord. Lords need to know more than how to hold a sword." He held Jory's gaze. "Can you arrange it?" "Sir Roderick won't object," Jory said. "He's been saying something like this for a year." "Good." Ned put his hand briefly on the man's shoulder. "Thank you, Jory." He went inside. He was building. He was building with the materials available, which were one trusted man, 17 years of Jory's competence, and the knowledge of what was going to happen if he didn't do this correctly. He had a list in his head of everything that needed changing, and it was very long and the window was very short, and the first step was information. Knowing what Littlefinger was doing in Winterfell and why he had come now, a year before the king's arrival, would have brought him naturally. He had not come naturally. He had come because he knew Ned would go south, and he wanted the groundwork laid early, the relationship built, the trust established before it became useful. That was how Littlefinger operated, years ahead. Always years ahead. The specific, patient investment of a man who understood that power was built like a wall, one stone at a time, long before anyone needed the wall. Ned was going to build faster. Jon. The conversation he didn't have. Jon came to find him on the third day, not because anything had happened. Jon came to find Ned in the evenings sometimes, had since he was old enough to seek his father out deliberately, rather than being brought to him. A different quality of visit than the children's general visiting, something more intentional. The boy finding his father when he needed the specific thing only his father could give. Ned was in the solar going through the letters that had arrived with the king's procession, requests, obligations, the administrative weight of the hand position that he had not yet accepted, but that was already accreting around him, the way weight accreted around large objects. Jon sat. He was 17. He had the stark dark and the stark build and the eyes that were not stark grey, but a different grey. The grey that Ned had learned to see as evidence, the grey that was Lyanna's, and under that Rhaegar's, the grey that told the truth of the boy's parentage if anyone looked carefully enough. In King's Landing, men had looked at Robert's bastards and seen the Baratheon colouring running true. If they looked at Jon, they would see something else entirely. "Are you going south?" Jon said. "Not will you." Not, "Father, I've heard." "Are you?" The direct, stark question. Ned set the letters down. He had been thinking about this conversation for 3 days. He had been thinking about what he owed Jon, not the tactical answer, the real one. In the first life, he had intended to tell Jon the truth when Jon came to visit him in King's Landing, and Jon had come, and he had started, and then the arrest had come first, and the truth had died with him, unspoken. He had a second chance. He had a second chance to tell this boy who his mother was, who his father was, what his blood carried. He had a second chance to give Jon the thing he had been denied for 17 years, the knowledge of himself. And the knowing would change everything. It might protect Jon. It might protect the entire succession if Ned could find a way to establish the truth before Cersei and Littlefinger turned it into a weapon. He looked at his nephew. Jon looked back with the Stark patience, not pushing, not performing, waiting with the quality of a boy who had learned to wait, because waiting was what bastards did when they wanted things that the world wasn't offering. I could tell him now, Ned thought. 3 days in, before the visit was complicated, before the political situation had sharpened into its various knives. He could sit his nephew down and say, "Jon, I have to tell you something. Your mother was Lyanna Stark, my sister. Your father was Rhaegar Targaryen. You are not a bastard. You are Aegon Targaryen, the heir of a dynasty that was destroyed before you were old enough to know it existed." He could say it. The words were in him, built and ready. 17 years of carrying them accumulated into a sentence that had been waiting for exactly this moment. He didn't say it. He didn't say it because he thought of what came after. Jon knowing. Jon, who was 17 and proud and duty-bound, who wore the bastard's burden the way the North wore cold, not as suffering but as identity, the thing that made him who he was by requiring him to earn everything he had. Jon, who would hear Targaryen and hear Dragonblood and would need time, not days, years, to integrate the knowing with the being. And he didn't have years. He had weeks. He had the King's visit, and then the hand question, and then King's Landing, and then everything else. And dropping this knowledge on Jon now was not protecting Jon. It was protecting Ned, relieving himself of the carrying, putting it somewhere else so he didn't have to hold it alone anymore. That was not enough reason. "I'll go if Robert asks," Ned said. "He'll ask," Jon said. "He was going to ask Catelyn at breakfast." She deflected him. Ned almost smiled. Catelyn deflecting Robert Baratheon. "You're not going to the Night's Watch," Ned said instead. Jon looked at him. "What?" "I know you've been thinking about it." He had known it in the first life too. Jon had expressed it, not in so many words, but in the way he talked about the Watch. In the first life, Jon had gone to the Wall after Ned went south. In this life, Ned was not sending him there. "You're not going. I want you here. I want you learning what Robb is learning, the tactics, the governance, the political history of the North. If Robb has to go south for anything, you're the one holding Winterfell." Jon's face, the something in it, the thing that was not quite gratitude. A northerner would call gratitude something softer, and this wasn't soft. It was the thing that arrived when a bastard son was told, plainly and without ceremony, that he was needed. "All right," Jon said. "And Jon." Ned picked up the letters again, looking at them, not at the boy. "When I go south, if I go south, you're not to feel bound by anything that happens there. If it goes badly, if things get complicated." He held the letters. "The North is yours to hold. Whatever else changes." Jon was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like you're expecting things to go badly," he said. Ned looked at the letters. "I'm a Stark," he said. "We prepare for winter." Jon left. Ned sat with the letters and the fire, and the weight of the thing he hadn't said. He had promised Lyanna. He had promised Lyanna this time too. Robert's offer. What Ned said yes to. Robert asked him in the Godswood on the 5th day. Not the crypt this time. Robert had spent enough time with the dead, he said, and preferred the living wood. They walked among the trees, and Robert talked about the court and the small council and the specific deterioration of the realm's management under Jon Arryn's absence, and the talking was the approach, the circling before the ask. I need a hand, Robert said finally. I know, Ned said. Robert stopped walking. You knew, Robert said. You've been building to it since you arrived. Ned looked at the weirwood's face. Every conversation has been about how badly King's Landing is run without someone you trust. You trust me. The logic is direct. Robert studied him. You're different, Robert said. Not for the first time, he'd said it twice already, in different registers. But this time it had an edge to it, the edge of someone who had been building a question and was now asking it. I'm getting older, Ned said. It's not age. Robert held the look. You know something. He was very still. Robert, don't tell me nothing. Don't tell me you're tired or worried about Catelyn or concerned about the crops. You've been looking at every person in this castle since we arrived like you're reading something behind their faces. He crossed his arms. I've known you for 30 years. You look like a man holding a fire in his hands. Ned looked at his oldest friend. He could tell him. He could tell him everything. Cersei, Joffrey, the wine, the boar. Robert would believe him, but he knew what Robert would do with it. Robert would burn. Robert had a specific relationship with betrayal. He had been betrayed by Rhaegar, by the woman he loved, by the war he'd built his life around, and 15 years of the throne's specific corruption had not made him better at receiving betrayal calmly. He would confront Cersei immediately, publicly, with the specific Robert confrontation style that was maximum force, minimum strategy. And Cersei would deny it. And Cersei would counter it. And Joffrey would be on the throne inside the year regardless, because Robert's blunt confrontation would hand Cersei exactly the time and the pretext and the motivation she needed. He couldn't tell Robert. He couldn't tell Robert, and he could not explain why he couldn't tell Robert, and the not explaining was the first of many things he was going to have to carry for the rest of however long this second chance lasted. I'll take the position, Ned said. Robert blinked. You'll. Just like that. The realm needs a hand, Ned said. Jon Arryn is gone. I can do it. I'll do it. He looked at Robert. But I want things from you in exchange. You want things. Robert's voice had the warmth of a man who was surprised and pleased and covering the surprise with the pleasure. Stannis, Ned said. Stannis Baratheon. He's been on Dragonstone doing nothing for years because you treat him like a problem you've decided to ignore. I want him recalled to court. I want him on the small council. Stannis is the most honest man in your kingdom, Ned said. You need honest men around you. You've been surrounded by Lannisters and their clients for too long. He held Robert's gaze. That's the first thing. Robert's jaw worked. What else? Sansa stays north. My daughters both stay north. Robert opened his mouth, closed it. Joffrey was asking about. Joffrey is 12. He can wait. Ned held the gaze. My daughters stay in Winterfell. Robert was very quiet for a moment. This is not the conversation I expected, Robert said. I know. You expected me to refuse for 3 days and then agree with no conditions. Ned held the gaze. I'm the hand of the king, Robert. I'm not your servant. I am going to King's Landing to run your kingdom for you. In exchange, you give me the things I need to run it. A long moment. Then Robert laughed. The full laugh. The real one. Gods, he said. Cat must have put something in your food. He shook his head. Fine, Stannis recalled. The girls stay. What else? Keep Cersei out of small council matters, Ned said. Robert stopped laughing. She's the queen. She's been running your court for 3 years. She has specific people in specific positions. I want a clean council. Not her people, not Lannister clients. People who serve the realm. He held the gaze. I know this is politically complex. I'm not asking you to exile her. I'm asking you to support me when she pushes against my decisions. Robert looked at him. The look went on for several seconds. You're going to make enemies, Robert said. Already have some, Ned said. Robert's mouth twisted. All right, he said. All right. You'll have my backing. You won't like using it. I'm a terrible backer. I'll forget I promised and you'll have to remind me, and I'll resent the reminding, but you'll have it. I know how you are, Ned said. You knew before you asked. Yes. Robert shook his head again. You're very different, he said. I told you. Getting older. They walked back through the Godswood, and the Weirwood's face watched them go, and Ned thought about the man beside him, and the year ahead of him, and the things he was going to have to do, and he felt the shape of the second withdrawal from the account, the thing he had said to Robert that was technically true, and was also a lie of omission the size of the wall. He was going to King's Landing to save the realm. He was going to need to become someone the realm's enemies couldn't predict. He was already becoming someone Ned Stark wouldn't recognize. Bran. What didn't happen? Or the thing that didn't happen happened on the 11th day. Ned knew it had happened, or rather, had not happened, because Jory Castle came to him at midday with a report that was phrased as nothing in particular, and that was the most important nothing he had ever received. Bran tried to access the broken tower, Jory said. He found Tim standing at the base per your instructions. Bran asked to climb. Tim said Lord Stark had restricted access. Bran argued. Tim held the position. A pause. Bran went back to his lessons. Ned sat with this for a long moment. Thank you, he said. Jory nodded and left. Ned sat alone in the solar and let himself feel the thing he had been carrying since dawn on the first day, the specific weight of a man who has been afraid of a thing for so long that the fear has become load-bearing, structural, part of how he held himself up. Bran had not climbed the tower. Jaime and Cersei had not been discovered. Bran had not been thrown. His son was going to keep his legs. He sat with his hands on his knees, and he breathed very carefully. Then he thought, Cersei and Jaime still needed somewhere private. They would find somewhere else. The behavior hadn't stopped. The prevention had only prevented this specific instance. He needed to make the discovery less likely while making himself less threatening, less likely to be seen as a loose end that Cersei needed to manage. The discovery had only been a problem because Bran had survived it. Ned had gone to King's Landing and found the evidence of the parentage and threatened Cersei before he had allies to protect himself. She had moved against him. Because he had been a threat she couldn't neutralize any other way. This time, he wasn't going to threaten Cersei. This time he was going to build a case that didn't require Cersei to be threatened, because a threat required immediate response, and a case could be constructed while the target didn't know they were the target. He went to write to Sam Tarly's father. No, to Sam directly, at the Citadel. He had heard, in the first life, that Sam had found evidence of the succession question in the Citadel's records. He had never had the chance to use it. He was going to request it now, framed as a hand's legitimate inquiry into the historical records of the Baratheon succession, cross-referenced against the Lannister lineage that had intermarried with the crown. He wrote the letter. He was writing. He was building. Every day was a stone. What he was building was not Ned Stark's version of honor. He was beginning to understand this. Catelyn again. The departure. She came to him the night before he left. Robert's procession was departing in the morning, and Ned was riding with it, without Sansa, without Arya, with a reduced household staff and the specific reduced footprint of a man who wanted to be a smaller target than the last hand had been. The children had been told, Robb was managing it with the Stark stoicism that was already becoming lordly. Arya had argued loudly and specifically, and then accepted it in the way Arya accepted things she didn't like, which was by finding 3 other problems to be loudly angry about. Bran was still Bran, still moving through Winterfell with the specific physical confidence of a boy who had both his legs and who did not know what the alternative felt like. Catelyn came to his solar after the children were in their rooms. She sat across from him. "Tell me," she said. No preamble, no build-up. 17 years of Catelyn Tully's directness, which was different from Ned's directness. His was the economy of a man who didn't bother with anything extra. Hers was the precision of a woman who had decided the time for indirection was over. He looked at her. He had been wondering for 3 weeks whether to tell her. He had run the argument back and forth so many times it had worn grooves. The argument for she was his partner. She was formidable. She would not make the mistakes he'd made. She knew the South's courts and the political terrain in ways he didn't, and her instincts were better than his at navigating the space between what people said and what they meant. The argument against, she would carry it. She would carry the knowing the way he was carrying it, and the carrying would mark her face, and marked faces in King's Landing were red. She would know about Cersei and not be able to act on it immediately, and the not acting would be its own torment. She would know about Littlefinger, and Catelyn had a history with Baelish that was personal in ways that made the knowing about Littlefinger specifically dangerous. She loved him. She was fierce about the things she loved. Love made her dangerous in the wrong direction when the wrong direction was the one she'd choose. He couldn't tell her. "I don't know what you mean," he said. She held the look without any warmth. Not angry, precise. The look of a woman who had decided she was going to make this difficult. "You've been different since the morning Robert arrived," she said. "You've been watching everything. All of us. The children, the guests, the yard, the towers. You restricted the broken tower before Bran had done anything to require restricting. You told Jon he wasn't going to the Watch before Jon had mentioned the Watch." She held the look. "You asked Jory to do something that you haven't told me about." He said nothing. "You are my husband," she said, "and you are keeping something from me. And I am telling you, before you leave for King's Landing, that I know you are keeping something from me, and that I will not stop watching for what it is. And that if you need me, when you need me, because I know you, Ned, you will need me, I will be here. And the sooner you trust me with the full weight of it, the better positioned I will be to help you carry it." He held his wife's gaze. He thought about the first life, about Catelyn riding south to King's Landing, about Catelyn intercepting Tyrion on the King's Road, about Catelyn releasing Jaime from Riverrun, about every Catelyn decision that had been brave and fierce and correct in its own logic and catastrophic in its consequence. Not because she was stupid. She was not stupid. She was one of the most intelligent people he had ever known, but because she had incomplete information, and the decisions she made with incomplete information had the quality of all decisions made with incomplete information, which was they were right about what they knew and wrong about what they didn't. The only way to give her complete information was to tell her what he remembered. He could not do that. "I will tell you," he said, "when I can, when I understand it better myself." He held her gaze. "I promise you, when I have something I can explain, I will explain it." She held the look for a long moment. She was not satisfied. He could see it. She was filing this in the same place she had been filing things for 3 weeks, the place that was full and getting fuller. "Come back alive," she said. It was the hardest thing she had said to him. It was the thing she had said the first time, before he went south the first time, and he had come back to her in a box. "Yes," he said. She left. He sat in the solar for a long time. He thought about what he was. He thought about the man who had told Catelyn everything, always, within the boundaries of the one lie. He had told her about the rebellion and the war, and the things he had done, and the things he wished he hadn't, and the specific weight of ruling. He had told her everything he could, and kept the one secret. Now he was keeping more than one. Now he was keeping a whole account of secrets, and the account was growing. He sat with the fire, and he waited for the morning. The road. What he did with the time. The road to King's Landing took 3 weeks, and Ned used every day of it. He rode near Robert as he had the first time, listening to Robert's complaints about the realm. He listened differently now, not with the patience of a man enduring something, but with the attention of a man cataloguing. Robert's complaints about the small council were revealing about who had Robert's ear and who didn't. His complaints about Cersei were revealing about the marriage and the court dynamics. His complaints about his children told Ned things about Joffrey that confirmed what he already knew, and things about Tommen and Myrcella that he hadn't paid enough attention to the first time. He began to understand Tommen. Tommen was 9. Tommen was gentle. Tommen was the thing that Joffrey would never be. A boy who could, with the right formation, become a decent king. Not a great one, but a decent one. A king who would not set the city on fire. He began to think about Tommen. He also talked to Renly. Renly Baratheon rode with the procession, and Ned had not talked to Renly the first time. Not significantly, not substantively. He had managed Renly as a political quantity, rather than as a person, and Renly had done what Renly did, which was go his own way, and end up dead for it. Now Ned rode with Renly for 2 days of the journey, and listened to the young lord, and assessed. Renly was 21. He was charming and ambitious, and had the Baratheon colouring, but not the Baratheon bulk. The frame of a man who was still becoming, rather than already built. He was perceptive in ways that his brother Stannis was not smarter, differently attuned to people where Stannis was attuned to principle. He was also someone who could be useful, if he was positioned correctly. "Your brother," Ned said, on the second day. "Stannis, I'm told he's been managing Dragonstone effectively." "Stannis manages everything effectively," Renly said. "It's his great failing, according to everyone who has to work with him. I've asked the king to recall him to court." Renly's eyebrows went up. "Has he agreed?" "He has." Renly absorbed this. "Stannis will hate it." "Stannis hates most things. He does them regardless." Ned looked at the road. "I'm going to need people I can trust. Stannis is honest. He's the most honest man in the realm. Honest people are rare enough to be valuable even when they're difficult." Renly studied him with the young lord's assessment, the political animal's reading of whether a statement was genuine or a performance. "You're different from what I expected," Renly said. "People keep saying that," Ned said. "The reputation is honor without politics," Renly said. "The man beside me has a political agenda." Ned kept his eyes on the road. "I have a family to keep alive," he said. "And a king who needs someone to run his kingdom before it runs itself into the ground. That requires politics." "What do you want from me?" Renly said. Ned looked at him. "You're already on the small council," Ned said. "Master of laws, I want you to actually be present at it, not in body only. I want you somewhere I can see you, and somewhere you can see what's happening. And I want you to understand that your interest, and Stannis' interest, and the realm's interest are all the same interest right now, even if none of you will agree about that." Renly was very quiet. "This is not a conversation I was prepared for," he said. "I know. I thought you were going to ask me about hunting. Do you want to talk about hunting?" "Not particularly, no." Renly looked at the road. "I'll think about it." "That's all I ask," Ned said. He went back to riding at Robert's side. He was not himself. He was Ned Stark with the knowledge stripped away of the man who had trusted incorrectly and trusted too late, and been surprised by things he should have seen coming. He was Ned Stark, who had decided that the North and the children and the realm were worth one more lie added to the specific pile of lies that this life was becoming. He was Ned Stark, who was looking at Renly Baratheon and calculating rather than simply talking, who was managing Robert's emotions rather than simply being with his oldest friend, who was carrying so much that he could barely carry himself. He was becoming good at it. That was the worst part. He was becoming good at it. King's Landing. What he saw first. King's Landing hit him the same way it had the first time, which was full force, no warning, the smell of it and the noise of it arriving before the sight of it, and not preparing you for the sight regardless. 500,000 people living on top of each other in the specific compressed density that produced not civilization, but a kind of managed chaos that looked like civilization from above and felt like anything but from the inside. He rode through the gates behind Robert's procession, and he watched the city with both sets of eyes. The Northern Lord, who was encountering it again, and the man who had died here, and who was therefore encountering it with the specific knowledge of what it did to people. The Red Keep rose above it all. He looked at the Red Keep, and he thought about Cersei, who was already in it, who had ridden ahead of the procession 3 days ago on the stated ground of arrangements and on the actual ground of wanting to receive him in her own space, rather than arriving alongside him. He thought about Littlefinger, who had ridden ahead 4 days ago, also on stated grounds and actual grounds that Jory's surveillance had partially illuminated. 3 letters sent from Winterfell, 1 to someone in the financial quarter of King's Landing, 1 to someone at the Citadel, 1 to someone in the Vale whose identity Jory had not been able to establish. He had the letters' existence. He did not have their contents. It was enough to confirm the direction of Littlefinger's operations. He was managing assets in 3 directions simultaneously, which was Littlefinger's architecture, never one string, always multiple, so that the pulling of any one string appeared to be about that string, rather than about the overall design. The first meeting with the small council was the next morning. Ned sat through it and assessed. Varys he had always found difficult to read, and found just as difficult now. The eunuch's warmth was a weapon in the way that all of Varys's social instruments were weapons, deployed precisely and withdrawn cleanly. He was watching Ned with the special attention he reserved for new things in the castle's environment, the watching of a man whose job was information and who was deciding how to categorize a new information source. Grand Maester Pycelle was exactly what Ned had known he was, a Lannister client performing independence. He deferred to Ned on procedural questions and deferred to his own instincts on everything else, and the instincts were Lannister-shaped. Littlefinger sat across the table and smiled and offered the financial accounts with the air of a man displaying impressive work. And the accounts were impressive. Genuinely impressive. The creative genius of a man who had turned the realm's deficit into a set of numbers that looked stable if you didn't examine too closely where the numbers came from. Debt, Ned said, the morning of the first full council. Littlefinger smiled. Managed debt. The Crown owes 6 million gold dragons to the Iron Bank of Braavos. The Iron Bank has always been patient. The Iron Bank has always been patient until it isn't, Ned said. He looked at the accounts without looking at Littlefinger. They will call these loans eventually. When they do, the realm has no reserves to answer the call. He set the accounts down. We need to begin addressing the principal. The silence around the table. Littlefinger's smile had acquired a quality, not less warm, something underneath the warmth. He was reading Ned's knowledge of the financial situation and reading it against what Ned Stark of Winterfell should know about the Crown's debt structure, and the reading was producing a question. Ned watched Littlefinger notice that Ned knew too much. Ned had been preparing for this. Jon Arryn briefed me, Ned said, without waiting for the question. Before he died. He wrote extensively. I've been studying his correspondence. He put the accounts on the table. These numbers are Littlefinger's work, and the work is genuinely clever. The cleverness is also the problem. It's designed to look stable rather than to be stable. I'd like an accounting of the real position. Littlefinger's smile held. Of course, my Lord Hand, he said. Ned held the accounts and he did not look at the face behind the smile, and he thought, I know what you are, and I am going to take apart everything you've built, and I am going to do it slowly and carefully, and without letting you know it's coming. Because the moment you know it's coming is the moment you start running the counter. He looked at Varys. Lord Varys, he said, I'd appreciate a briefing on the city's security situation. This afternoon, if your schedule allows. Varys bowed. Of course. The council moved on. Varys. The conversation neither expected. Varys came to him that afternoon. He came with the specific Varys manner, soft-footed, well-timed, appearing when Ned was between appointments and when there was therefore a natural window that could be explained as coincidence. He sat across from Ned in the Hand's chambers with the folded hands and the eunuch's absolute composure. Security in the city is satisfactory, Varys said. The city watch is manageable. The specific concerns are the usual ones, the city's lower quarters, the dockside. He paused. That's not what I came to discuss. No, Ned said. What did you come to discuss? Varys held the pause with the specific patience of a man who was deciding how to say the thing he wanted to say. You came to King's Landing differently than I expected, he said. I've been told that, Ned said. You came with conditions already established, Stannis recalled. Your daughter's north. A specific financial agenda for the council's first meeting. He held the folded hands. Lord Stark, in 15 years of this court, I have never seen a new hand arrive with an agenda rather than discovering one. He held the look. You should know. This is interesting to me. Not threatening. Interesting. Ned looked at him. In the first life, he had looked at Varys with the instinctive northern suspicion of a man who didn't know what to do with eunuchs and didn't quite trust what he couldn't categorize. Now he looked at Varys with the knowledge of what Varys had done, and what Varys had tried to do, and what Varys's actual interests were, which were not the Lannisters, and not the Baratheons, and were the realms in the specific Varys way of serving the realm by serving his own judgment of what the realm required. I want to ask you something directly, Ned said. I'll answer if I'm able. You serve the realm, Ned said, not the king. You've served multiple kings. Your loyalty is to the institutional continuity of the Seven Kingdoms, not to any individual sitting the throne. He held Varys's gaze. Is that accurate? Varys's expression, already carefully neutral, became something that was neither confirmation nor denial, but was very close to surprise. That is a remarkably accurate description, Varys said. Then we may have a working relationship, Ned said, because my interest is the same. Not the same method. My methods are different from yours, and I'll not pretend otherwise. But the interest? Varys studied him. Lord Stark, he said, I must be honest. You are not what I was expecting. No one expects what I am this time, Ned said, and he said it without meaning to say the last two words out loud, and Varys caught them. He heard the specific stumble, the this time, that had no referent in any normal conversation. Varys held very still. This time, Varys said. Ned held the gaze. A long moment. A phrase, Ned said. It means nothing specific. Varys held the gaze for one more beat. Of course, he said. My Lord Hand, I look forward to our working relationship. He left. Ned sat with the aftermath of the mistake. Varys had heard it. The specific Varys attention that catalogued everything had catalogued this time, and had filed it in the place where Varys filed the things that needed more information before they could be used. He would not ask directly. He would watch. He would use his birds to watch, and he would build a picture from the watching, and then he would decide what the picture was. Ned needed to be more careful. He had been carrying this for 3 weeks, and he was already slipping. He went to the window. Below the window, the city. Below the city, 6 million dragons of debt. Behind the debt, Littlefinger. Behind Littlefinger, 15 years of construction that was invisible because it looked like management rather than architecture. He had to take it apart brick by brick. He had to do it while Cersei was watching him from the other direction. He had to do it while pretending to be the man he had been before he died. He stood at the window and he watched the city, and he thought about the man he had been and the man he was becoming, and the distance between them, and whether the distance could be crossed back. He didn't know. Cersei. What she did when she saw him. Cersei received him formally. This was her choice, and it told him things. She had the option to receive him informally, to come to the small council as she sometimes came, to catch him in the corridors, to arrange the accidental meeting that communicated casual authority. She chose the formal setting. Her solar, her ladies present, the seating arranged to put her on a slightly elevated chair that was not quite a throne and was clearly intended to communicate the proximity to one. Ned sat across from her, and he looked at Cersei Lannister for the first time in this life. She was beautiful. He had known this the first time, and had not fully registered it, because the beauty was dangerous in the way that all of Cersei's qualities were dangerous. It was the surface, the thing you noticed first, and by the time you noticed what was behind it, you were usually already in trouble. Her eyes assessed him. He assessed her back. She was looking for the country lord, the man who came south confused and principled and out of his depth. She was looking for the version of him she could manage, the version she had managed before. She did not find it. She was too subtle to show the not finding. But he watched the slight calibration, the shift in how she held the cup, the way her gaze moved fractionally before settling. "Lord Stark," she said, "the realm is glad to have a hand again." "Thank you, Your Grace." "Jon Arryn was a dear friend," she said. "His loss has been keenly felt." He knew she had killed Jon Arryn. She had done it through Lisa Tully's love for Littlefinger, the instrument of a woman who would do anything for a man who would say what she needed to hear. Jon Arryn had found the evidence, and Cersei had removed Jon Arryn before the evidence could be used. He looked at her, and he thought about saying, "I know what you did. I know about the lineage, and the book, and the investigation. I know that your children are not Robert's, and I know that you know I'll find out eventually, and I know that the moment you believe I'll act on what I find, you'll move against me." He did not say it. "He was," Ned said. "I intend to continue the work he started." Something moved in her eyes. Fast. Gone before it was fully there. But he'd been watching. "Of course," she said. "Is there anything you need from me? The household staff, the servants?" "The household runs well," Ned said. "Your management of the castle has been excellent." The warmth she produced was perfectly calibrated. "Thank you." "I do have one request," Ned said. "Of course." "The small council business." He held her gaze. "I understand you've been present at certain sessions. I'll be running a more formal council structure, attendance restricted to members. I hope you understand." The warmth stayed. Underneath it, ice. "Naturally," she said. "Robert's kingdom should be Robert's kingdom, Exactly, Ned said. She smiled. He smiled back. They were both lying with their smiles, and they both knew it. And the knowing was the specific quality of a conversation between two people who could not say what they meant because the meaning would start a war. He left her solar, and he walked the corridor, and he counted the withdrawal. Another stone gone from the account. He had smiled at the woman who had wanted him to take the black, who had argued for his life in front of her son and lost the argument and watched Elin Payne raise ice anyway. He had smiled, and she had smiled, and they had both been performing, and the performance had been perfect, and it had cost him something that wasn't a named thing, but that was real. He went to find Stannis. Stannis, the only honest man. Stannis Baratheon arrived from Dragonstone the same week and was immediately unhappy about it. He was unhappy about being recalled, unhappy about court, unhappy about the specific people who were in court, and he communicated all of this through the specific Stannis medium, which was not saying any of it and being entirely obvious regardless. He carried his unhappiness the way he carried everything, as a principle he was committed to upholding regardless of social cost. Ned went to him. Not at court. At the chambers Stannis had been given, adequate chambers, not the chambers his rank technically warranted, because Cersei managed the chamber. Assignment and adequate rather than excellent was Cersei's specific way of communicating things she didn't say aloud. Stannis received him with the specific Stannis greeting, which was no greeting at all. Just the acknowledgement of the presence and the waiting to find out what the presence required. I requested your return, Ned said. I know, Stannis said. Robert told me. He told me you specified Stannis Baratheon by name. He looked at Ned with the look that was Stannis's version of gratitude, which was indistinguishable from all his other looks. Why, because I need someone honest on the council, Ned said. You need more than honest, Stannis said. You need effective. I'm both, but the council is not in the habit of rewarding either. The council is going to change, Ned said. Stannis held the look, processing. Stannis processed everything with the rigorous attention of a man who had decided that no information deserved to be taken at face value. Jon Arryn was investigating the succession, Stannis said. Not a segue, a direct statement. Before he died, he came to me. He showed me what he'd found. He held the look. You know about it. Ned held very still. This was the first time the conversation had been this direct with anyone. What did he show you? Ned said. The book, Stannis said. The lineage book. The Baratheon colouring. Black of hair, blue of eye. Every Baratheon recorded for 3 generations. He held the look. Every Baratheon except 3. Ned held the look. You know, Stannis said. It wasn't a question. You came south knowing. You knew before Jon Arryn wrote to you. That's why you came with conditions instead of questions. He held the look with the Stannis quality of a man who had decided the truth was the truth, and that the only question was what to do with it. What are you going to do? Ned thought about the first life. Stannis had sent a raven to Ned with the succession question, and Ned had sent back a message suggesting Stannis wait. And Stannis had gone to Dragonstone and launched his own claim, and the war had started, and Stannis had lost. He was not going to let that happen. I'm building a case, Ned said. Legal, documented, not my word against hers. Evidence. The book, the lineage records. The testimony of relevant witnesses. He held the look. If Cersei's children are not Robert's, the succession passes to you. You are Robert's legal heir by blood. He held the look. But we cannot move on this without Robert's awareness. And we cannot move on it rashly. Robert will have to know, Stannis said. He will. When the time is right. When is the time right? When we have everything locked. When Cersei has no room to maneuver, no allies to call on, no legal position to contest it from. Ned held the look. If we move too early and she has room to fight, she will fight, and the fighting will split the realm in ways neither of us can predict or control. Stannis held the silence. You're not what I expected, he said. Ned Stark from the north. No, Ned said. I'm not. Good, Stannis said. The Ned Stark from the north I expected would have told Robert immediately and been dead within the month. He held the look. This is better. Ned left Stannis's chambers and stood in the corridor for a moment. He thought, Stannis just said what Robert will say eventually, what Catelyn has been saying, what everyone who knew the first Ned Stark will say when they notice the difference. You're not what I expected. The man who had lived here before was readable. The man who was here now was not. He was becoming unreadable. He had always been honest. Honesty had always been the thing you could rely on in Ned Stark. You might disagree with him, but you always knew what you were disagreeing with. Now he was moving in directions that he couldn't explain, and making alliances on logic he couldn't share, and carrying a weight that shaped every conversation, without the conversations being able to contain it. He was becoming a man whose depth you couldn't see. He walked back to the Hand's Tower. He sat at his desk. He picked up the quill. He wrote a letter to Catelyn. Not about any of it. About the children, about Rob's training, about Bran's latest project, which, according to Jon's last letter, had pivoted from tower climbing to an obsessive interest in the ravens and their roots, about Arya, who was apparently terrorizing the training yard again, about Jon, who had been doing something with old books in the library that none of them understood, but that had Jon completely absorbed. He wrote about none of the things that mattered, and all of the people who did. He sent the letter. He picked up the next document. He went back to work. Littlefinger. The dismantling begins. He went after Littlefinger's money first, not because it was the most important thing, but because it was the most auditable. Littlefinger's political operations ran on the one thing Littlefinger controlled that no one else understood: the money. If you could map the money, you could map the operations. If you could map the operations, you could identify the people. If you could identify the people, you could begin to unwind the architecture. He had the financial records from the council sessions. He had his own knowledge of what Littlefinger did, the gold houses, the brothels, the specific financial instruments that Littlefinger had developed over 15 years of being the Crown's master of coin. Instruments that were simultaneously legal and constructed specifically to be unintelligible to anyone who hadn't built them. He had not built them, but he had read everything Jon Arryn had written in the story of what had happened the first time, and Jon Arryn had been investigating the money before the succession question had fully emerged, because the money was where everything started. He brought Stannis in. Stannis had no patience for financial complexity and no patience for Littlefinger, and both qualities were useful. Stannis sat across from Ned with the accounts on the table between them, and he went through them with the systematic rigidity of a man who did not accept the proposition that something was too complex to be understood. "These positions," Stannis said, pointing to a column, "are being funded from treasury accounts, but they produce no treasury revenue. Where does the return go?" "That's the question," Ned said. "It goes somewhere specific," Stannis said. "Money doesn't disappear. It changes shape." He looked at the column. "These are lending positions. The interest is going somewhere." "To private accounts," Ned said. "I think. I have not been able to identify whose." "Then we need someone who can identify them," Stannis said. "Not someone from the City Watch. Someone who understands the instruments." "I've sent to the Citadel," Ned said. "The financial scholars." Stannis nodded. Stannis accepted answers when they were adequate. Separately, through Jory, who had come south with Ned, with a specific expanded brief that Jory had accepted without question, because Jory's loyalty was complete and unconditional. He was tracking Littlefinger's movements and his contacts. The network was extensive. Ned had known this in theory. In practice, the mapping of it was something that produced a specific kind of cold in his chest every morning when Jory's report arrived, because the architecture was larger than he had thought, the tendrils reaching into places he would not have predicted. The City Watch. Its own commander was Littlefinger's man. He noted this. He did not move against it immediately. Moving against it immediately would alert Littlefinger to the watching. He needed Littlefinger to believe, for as long as possible, that Ned was the country lord who didn't understand the city, the man who was asking sensible questions about financial accounts without understanding what the questions were finding. He needed to harvest everything from the position of apparent ignorance before converting the harvest into action. This required patience. Ned had never been required to be patient about a man he was watching. He had always been direct. This is wrong. This is right. This is the thing to do. Now he sat in the Hand's Tower every morning reading Jory's report and filing the information and watching the architecture grow more visible and doing nothing about the visibility. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Not the battle at the Tower of Joy. Not riding home with Lyanna's child. Not standing on the Great Sept steps. The hardest thing was sitting in a chair and watching Peter Baelish talk to the commander of the City Watch and writing it down and waiting for the correct moment. The correct moment was not yet. He waited. Robert. The Boar Hunt. Robert announced the boar hunt 6 weeks after Ned arrived in King's Landing. The announcement itself was not the event. The event was what Ned did with the 6 weeks between the announcement and the hunt. He had thought about this. He had thought about it extensively on the road south and in the quiet hours at the Hand's Tower and in the specific early mornings when he woke before the castle and sat with what he knew and tried to work out the shape of it. Robert was going to die. Robert was going to go on a hunting trip, and he was going to drink too much, because he was always drinking too much, and a boar was going to get through the wine-slowed guard, and the wound was going to be the one he didn't recover from. Cersei would not prevent this. Whether Cersei arranged the wine or simply allowed the excess and managed the timing, Ned was not certain of the mechanism, only the outcome. The outcome was Robert dying of a boar's tusk. A death that sounded like accident and was in fact the specific convergence of a man's worst habits and a woman's cold patience. He could not stop Robert from drinking. He had tried once, obliquely, without explaining why. Robert had received the oblique approach with affectionate dismissal and a refilled cup. Ned had backed away. The direct approach, "Robert, I believe your wine is being managed by someone who wants you to be less than your best when a boar has the opportunity," required evidence he didn't have yet and would have sounded, without the evidence, like either madness or political maneuvering. What he could do was the hunt itself. He went to Robert's hunts. He had never gone before. Hunting was Robert's specific escape from the court, and Ned had respected the escape because Ned himself valued the specific privacy of the things you did without an audience. Now he rode with the hunt. He positioned himself near Robert. He was present. He was the sober man in the group of drinking men. Not ostentatiously sober. He held a cup. He just didn't drink from it with the same frequency. He was simply there, steady, present. The northern lord who was perhaps less enthusiastic about the hunting wine than his southern companions. Robert didn't ask why. Robert was Robert. He accepted the presence of his oldest friend at his hunt as a natural and pleasant thing. He told stories, and he drank and he chased things through the forest, and Ned rode beside him and watched the drinking and held the cup and was present. On the boar hunt, the specific boar hunt, the one in the woods outside King's Landing that had been scheduled and cancelled twice and that finally went out on a Tuesday morning in the 6th week, Ned rode at Robert's left shoulder through the entire chase. The boar came from the right. It came exactly as Ned had been told it would come, fast, from the undergrowth, a very large animal in a very bad mood. Robert's reaction was the reaction of a man who had been drinking since dawn, but who had also been fighting since he was 17, and whose body retained the memory of violence even when the mind was elsewhere. He got his spear up. He got it up better than the first time, Ned thought, because Ned was at his left and there was no way to spear a boar from the left So Robert's whole attention was on the right, and the right was where the boar was, and the spear went true. It did not go perfectly. Robert was still gored. The tusk caught him along the ribs rather than in the gut. The difference between a wound that took a month to heal and a wound that killed in 3 days. Robert went down. Ned was off his horse before Robert hit the ground. The maester was called. The wound was cleaned. Robert spent 3 days in bed and emerged on the 4th with the Baratheon opinion about forced rest, which was severe and not printable in polite company. He lived. He was alive. Ned stood in the corridor outside Robert's chambers on the 4th day, and he held the wall because the wall was solid and the floor was not. He held the wall and he breathed. He felt the thing that came out of him, that had been inside him for 6 weeks, the compressed fear of a man who had watched someone he loved die, and who had been carrying the fear of it happening again, and who was now releasing the fear because the thing had not happened. He was alive. Robert was alive. Ned went back to work. Cersei. What she did when she realized. She came to him in the 9th week, not formally this time. She came to the Hand's Tower in the evening, without announcement, without ladies, with the specific quality of a woman who had decided that formality was no longer the right weapon for the situation. He was at his desk. She sat across from him without invitation. He put down the quill. They looked at each other. She was very beautiful and very dangerous, and the two things were not separable. And he had known this for 9 weeks, and had spent 9 weeks managing the knowledge. And now she was across the desk from him in the evening with the specific Cersei face that she wore when she had decided to be direct. "You're not what I expected," she said. "I've heard that," Ned said. "From whom?" "Several people." She held his gaze with the assessment. She was reading him the way she read everyone, for desire, for ambition, for fear. The 3 things that moved men, in Cersei's experience of men, and that provided the specific handles she used to move them. She was not finding what she was looking for. "What do you want?" she said. "Not what you've told Robert. Not what you've said in council. What do you actually want? From this?" He held her gaze. He knew what she was doing. She was looking for the real Ned, the Ned who had hidden desires, the Ned who wanted something specific that he could be given or threatened with or offered. She was assuming the hidden desires existed because in her experience of men, the hidden desires always existed. He said, "A functioning realm." She smiled. "That's not an answer." "It is," he said. "I want a realm that works. I want a small council that advises rather than maneuvers. I want a treasury that doesn't collapse in the next decade. I want the succession clear and documented and not a source of ongoing political instability." He held her gaze. "I want to go home to my family when it's done." She held the look. "The succession," she said, very still, very controlled. Underneath, the thing she was afraid of. "It's always unclear," he said. He held the gaze. "Robert has 3 children. Their ages and health are documented. I'm ensuring the documentation is up to date and legally sound." He held the gaze. Standard practice for a new hand. She said nothing for a moment. "You've been talking to Stannis," she said. "He's on the council. We talk regularly. Stannis has opinions about the succession." "Stannis has opinions about everything," Ned said. "Most of them are correct. I find that useful." She was very still. "Lord Stark," she said, "I want to say something to you that I want you to hear as I mean it. Say it. I am the Queen. My children are the Crown Prince and the royal children. Whatever questions you have about documents and legal succession, the answers to those questions are political in nature as much as legal. Any information that emerges from that investigation will be contested by the Queen's lawyers and by the Lannister house and by every lord who has a client relationship with my father. She held the gaze. Are you certain of what you're starting? He held her gaze. He had what she had just given him, the acknowledgement. Not explicit. But the shape of it was there, the reference to what happens if the documents say the wrong thing, the reference to Lannister legal challenges, the reference to her father. She had not said my children are Robert's. She had talked about what would happen if the documents said they weren't. A month ago he would not have caught it. He caught it now. I'm certain that the realm needs a settled succession, he said. Whatever the investigation finds, the realm needs clarity. Uncertainty is more dangerous than difficult truth. She held his gaze for a long moment. She stood. Good night, Lord Stark, she said. She left. He sat in the chair for a moment. Then he got up and went to Stannis. He needed to move faster. The case. What he built and how. The case took 2 months to build and 3 days to deploy. He built it from 3 directions simultaneously. The first was the lineage book, the physical book, which he obtained through Stannis' specific and uncharmed insistence on the record-keeping rights of the Master of Laws. Stannis had requested the lineage book as part of an administrative review of inheritance records. Pycelle had been slow about it. Stannis had become Stannis about the slowness, and the book had appeared within a week. It said what it had always said. Black of hair, blue of eye. Every Baratheon for 3 generations. Every Baratheon except the current Crown Prince. The second was testimony, not from lords or knights, from women. The specific women who had attended Cersei's chambers during her pregnancies, women who knew what they knew and who had been afraid to say it, and who were less afraid of Ned Stark than they were of Cersei, because Ned Stark was asking carefully and gently, and was not Cersei. He had Jory do the asking, not himself, a man the women might speak to without the specific intimidation of the hand of the king. And Jory came back with 3 accounts that were individually insufficient and collectively overwhelming. The third was Littlefinger. Not Littlefinger's testimony. He needed Littlefinger removed from the board before the succession move, because Littlefinger's network would be Cersei's first resort for counter-operations. He needed to dismantle enough of the financial architecture to make the network unavailable when she needed it most. The Citadel scholars he had sent for came to King's Landing in the 11th week. They were dry men with ink-stained fingers who had opinions about financial instruments, the way other men had opinions about tournaments. He gave them 3 days with the Treasury records. They gave him back a 40-page analysis that translated what Littlefinger had built into language that Stannis could read and that a Lord's Council could understand. The analysis showed clearly, documented, cross-referenced, that the Crown's Master of Coin had been operating private enrichment schemes through Treasury accounts for at least 8 years. Not all of the transactions were illegal under current law, but enough of them were misappropriation that the legal case was solid. He gave the analysis to Stannis. Stannis read it in an afternoon and came back with the Stannis expression that was indistinguishable from his other expressions, but that Ned had learned to read as a kind of grave satisfaction. "This is enough," Stannis said. "For removal," Ned said. "Not criminal proceedings. The criminal case would take longer, and he'd have time to run before it completed." "Removal is sufficient," Stannis said. "Remove the instrument. The structure without the instrument is manageable." "I want to replace him with someone who will cooperate with the succession case," Ned said. "Renly," Stannis said, without warmth and without hesitation. "Renly is not my choice for anything. He's also competent, and he's not Lannister-aligned, and if he's given a position he values, he won't risk it." This was the Stannis quality, the correct tactical assessment delivered without sentiment. "Yes," Ned said. "Renly." He moved on Littlefinger the next morning. The confrontation was in the small council chamber. Just Ned, Stannis, and Littlefinger, with the analysis on the table between them. Ned had considered doing it in public. the council session, the formal removal. He had decided against it. Public humiliation was not the goal. The goal was removal without flight. Littlefinger looked at the analysis. He read it with the specific composure of a man who was very good at composure, and who was applying that skill to something that was considerably worse than he had expected. His face remained pleasant. His hands remained still. "This is impressive," he said when he finished. "Yes," Ned said. "Where did you find scholars capable of this?" "The Citadel has financial scholars," Ned said. "Most people don't think to use them." Littlefinger set the document down. He folded his hands. "What do you want?" he said. Ned looked at him. He thought about what the first Ned Stark would have said here. He thought about the honor of it, the principled northern lord who wanted the law observed and justice done, and the truth told. He thought about what that had cost the first time. "Resignation," Ned said. "Today, the position of Master of Coin, your departure from King's Landing, your return to the Vale, and your remaining there." Littlefinger studied him. "And if I don't," he said. "The analysis goes to the Lord's Council, and then to Robert," Ned said. "The criminal proceedings take 6 months. During those 6 months, you are in the city, the specific embarrassment of a man who built the most sophisticated financial fraud the realm has seen in 30 years, and who is now under investigation by the man he was supposed to be advising." He held the gaze. "You could fight it. You might even win. But the network you've built runs on discretion. Discretion doesn't survive 6 months of public investigation." The smile was still there. Underneath the smile, Ned could see the calculating. Littlefinger was running the numbers, the exact analysis that had built the architecture in the first place, the same architecture now being used to constrain it. "You're very good at this," Littlefinger said. "I had good teachers," Ned said, "mostly in what not to do." "The Vale," Littlefinger said. "The Vale." A long moment. "I have interests in the city," Littlefinger said. "Some of them will be sold as part of the succession review," Ned said. "The others can be managed from a distance. The Vale is not without its own opportunities." "The Vale is Lysa Arryn," Littlefinger said. "Yes," Ned said. "I know." There was something in the saying of it, the way Ned said, "I know," that made Littlefinger stop. The stop was very brief, but it was a stop. "When do you want the resignation?" Littlefinger said. "Today," Ned said. "I'll need to transfer the accounts." "Renly will handle the transfer," Ned said. "With supervision." Another pause. "You've thought about this very carefully," Littlefinger said. "Yes," Ned said. "More carefully than I would have expected." "People keep saying that." Littlefinger looked at him with the Littlefinger look of a man who was filing something he didn't understand yet into the category of things that needed more information before they could be used. Then he nodded. "Very well," he said. "You'll have the resignation this afternoon." He left. Stannis said when he was gone, "He'll cause problems from the Vale." "I know," Ned said. "But problems from the Vale are manageable. Problems from inside this castle with access to the treasury are not." He looked at where Littlefinger had been sitting. "One thing at a time." The resignation was on his desk before dinner. He sat with it for a moment. He had done it. He had removed Littlefinger from King's Landing. Not cleanly, not permanently. The man would find ways to operate from the Vale, and would use Lysa Arryn, and would continue to be dangerous from a distance, but out of the specific position from which he could most efficiently destroy what Ned was building. He put the resignation in the file. He went to find Robert. Robert. What Ned told him. He told Robert about the succession on a Tuesday. He had chosen Tuesday because Robert held no audiences on Tuesdays. It was his day for hunting correspondence and personal letters. A routine that Cersei found contemptible and that the court had learned to protect because a Robert who had no personal time was a Robert who was in everyone's business, and that was worse. Tuesday meant Robert would be sober enough to receive the information and undistracted enough to actually receive it. He found him in the solar. He told him. He told it plainly, in the way he told things. The book, the lineage, the women's testimony, the pattern. He told Robert that his brother Stannis had been aware of it. He told Robert that Jon Arryn had been investigating it before he died. Robert didn't say anything for a long time. He sat in the chair, and he held his cup. He was not drinking from it, just holding it. And he was very still in a way that was not the Robert still of composure, but the Robert still of a very large thing that had been hit and that had not yet decided what direction it was going to fall. "She's been for 15 years, Robert said. "I believe so," Ned said. "She's been in my bed, Robert. Don't." Flat. The specific flat Robert voice. "Don't. Give me a moment." Ned gave him a moment. Robert sat with the cup and the moment and the thing he had just been given. "Joffrey," Robert said. "Not yours," Ned said. "We believe." "Not mine." He said it again. I've been beating myself for 15 years about being a bad father to that boy. Because I couldn't love him the way he was always wrong in some way I couldn't explain, and I told myself I was a bad man for it." He looked at the cup. "He's not mine." "No," Ned said. "And Myrcella, and Tommen. The lineage records are consistent." Robert was quiet. He was doing the thing he did with large things, containing them by force, because Robert Baratheon had spent his life containing the large things by force, and the method worked, even when it looked like it was barely working. "What do you want to do?" Robert said. It was the question. Not, "What do we do?" "What do you want to do?" Robert asking Ned to carry the plan because Robert was not in a state to carry it. "Stannis is your legitimate heir," Ned said. "By blood, by law, unambiguously." He held the gaze. Joffrey's claim falls. Cersei will be. She needs to be separated from the children. Not immediately, not publicly, but the children need to be in the care of people who serve your interests. He held the gaze. And this needs to be done quietly. If it becomes public before we control the narrative, what narrative? The narrative that says this is a legal matter, a succession clarification, not a war. Because if it becomes a war, Cersei's father's army is the largest single fighting force in the realm, and Tywin Lannister's response to his daughter's humiliation is going to be military. Robert's jaw. "Let him come," Robert said. "Robert, let him come. I'll go out and meet him myself." "And the realm burns," Ned said. "While you and Tywin Lannister burn it, the people who live in it die. The realm needs this done cleanly." He held the gaze. "Let me do it cleanly." Robert held the cup. "What does cleanly look like?" he said. Ned told him. Cersei. The fall. Cersei moved first. He had expected this. He had built the plan around the expectation. She had seen enough of what he was doing to know that the succession investigation was real and that the evidence was solid. And the moment she understood it was solid, she would act. She had always been the woman who moved first rather than waited, who had always preferred the offensive because the offensive left her in control of the timing. She moved through the city watch. She went to the commander, Janos Slynt, who was Littlefinger's man in structure and whose allegiance had been available for purchase when Littlefinger's network was intact, and she moved through him. She went on a Wednesday morning. Ned was in the Hand's Tower. Jory came in at a dead run. "The city watch," Jory said. "They're moving through the castle, armed. She's ordered." "I know," Ned said. He had known this was coming. He had not known the exact timing. Jory? He stood. The specific conversation I have been saving for exactly this. Do you remember who I told you to find, if this happened? The Kingsguard, Jory said. Sir Barristan. Get Sir Barristan, Ned said. Now. He went to the corridor. The city watch was in the corridor. 7 men. Slint was with them, in person, with Slint's face of a man who had been given an order and was executing it without examining the order. Lord Stark, Slint said. On whose authority? Ned said. The Queen's. The Queen's authority does not extend to the arrest of the hand of the King, Ned said. This requires the King's authority, or the authority of the full small council. Do you have either? Slint held the look. He had not been given the full legal answer to this question. Cersei had given him an order, and orders were what Slint acted on. I have the Queen's order, Slint said. And I have the King, Ned said. He didn't. Not yet. But Robert was in the castle, and Robert had been told on Tuesday, and Robert had agreed to the plan, and the plan included this specific moment when Cersei moved, and Robert's backing became necessary. Hold here, Ned said to Slint. 1 minute. Let me get the King. He went to Robert's chambers. Robert was already in the corridor. He had heard the commotion. He was in his nightclothes with a cup of something, and the Baratheon expression that was the expression of a very large man who had been given a problem to hit. What's happening? Robert said. Cersei moved through the city watch, Ned said. They're in the corridor. They're trying to arrest me. Robert looked at the corridor, at Slint and the 7 men. Slint, he said. Your Grace. Slint stood straighter. Stand down, Robert said. The hand has my authority. He held the Baratheon look. Where's my wife? The Queen is in her chambers, Your Grace. Go to her chambers, Robert said. Tell her she is to remain there until I come to her. He held the look. Is that clear? It was very clear. The city watch went. Robert turned to Ned. Now, he said, tell me everything. They sat in Robert's chambers for 2 hours, and Ned told him everything. The full picture, the timeline, Littlefinger's role, and the city watch, and the specific mechanism by which Cersei had been managing the court for 15 years. Robert listened and held his cup, and didn't drink from it. When Ned finished, Robert was quiet for a long time. She tried to arrest my hand, he said. Yes. With my city watch? Yes. While I was in the castle? Yes. Robert set down the cup. What do we do now? He said. Now we do the legal part, Ned said. Officially, openly. We bring the evidence to the small council with witnesses. We establish the record. We make it public in the sequence that minimizes Tywin Lannister's ability to call it a coup rather than a legal proceeding. And Cersei? She stays in her chambers until the council has sat, Ned said. The children come to your care. The announcement is made. Then, your decision. A sept somewhere. A peaceful ending to the marriage. A peaceful ending, Robert said. His voice had something in it that was grief and rage and the specific exhaustion of a man who had spent 15 years in a marriage that had been wrong from the beginning and who was only now being given permission to stop. Yes, Ned said. Robert looked at the cup. She really isn't. She's not going to go quietly, he said. No, Ned said. But she's not going to have a choice. Robert sat with this. Ned, he said. Yes. You're very good at this. He held the gaze. You've always been the better man. I know that. I've always known that. But you were never good at the game. That's what I told myself. Ned is the better man, but the game needs players. He held the gaze. You're playing the game. Ned held his oldest friend's gaze. Yes, he said. How? A long moment. I learned, Ned said. Robert held the look. Then he nodded. the Robert nod. The enormous acceptance of something that required accepting. "All right," he said. "Tell me where to stand." The succession, how it fell. The small council sat in full session the next morning. Ned had spent the night not sleeping. He had been through the documents 3 more times and walked the corridors once, and sat at his desk twice, and stared at the fire once, and eventually given up on sleep entirely, and simply waited for the morning with the patience of a man who understood that the morning was coming regardless. He had Stannis. He had Renly, who had been briefed the previous evening and who had come in the morning with the expression of a man processing something larger than he had expected. Not resistant, absorbing, the specific Renly quality of a man who understood that his position had just become considerably more significant than it had been yesterday. He had Sir Barristan Selmy, who had come when Jory called and who had listened to the full account the previous night with the Kingsguard's specific attention to its oath. The oath was to the king, not to the king's wife. And what Barristan Selmy had heard was that the king's wife had attempted to arrest the king's hand with the king's city watch without the king's authority. Sir Barristan was not a complicated man. He was an honest one. He did not have Pycelle. Pycelle was Lannister aligned and would be a problem. He excluded him from the session on procedural grounds that were technically valid and that Pycelle would contest and that the contest would come too late. He did not have Varys. Varys sat in the council session with the folded hands and the expression that was the Varys expression, not support, not opposition, the careful neutrality of a man who had decided that neutrality was the correct position until the correct position became clearer. He was reading the room. He was reading Ned. He was reading the document when it was placed on the table. The document was read into the record. The testimony of the 3 women was read into the record. The lineage book evidence was presented. Stannis stated his position for the record as Robert Baratheon's oldest legitimate brother in the absence of a legitimate heir. The succession fell to him under the laws of the 7 kingdoms. Robert sat at the head of the table and said, "The succession falls to Stannis Baratheon. I am acknowledging this publicly. The claim of Joffrey Tommen and Myrcella Baratheon to royal titles is hereby rescinded pending the legal review." The room held this. Renly said, "Acknowledged." Stannis said, "The record is the record." Varys said nothing. Ned looked at Varys. Varys met his gaze. He said, "The realm requires stability. The transition should be managed with care for the children." A pause. "I have no objection to the proceeding." The council sat for another hour, establishing the legal record. Ned had prepared the documents, 12 months of preparation compressed into a 6-hour session that felt like a very long day, and was in fact the shortest version of what could have been a years-long war. When it was over, he went to the window. The city below. He had done it. He had prevented the War of 5 Kings. He had kept Robert alive and exposed Cersei's secret and removed Littlefinger from the apparatus he used to fund and execute his operations. Stannis was the acknowledged heir. The legal succession was clear. The realm was not going to tear itself apart over a 12-year-old blonde boy. He had done it. He stood at the window and he waited to feel the thing he had expected to feel, which was relief. He waited. He felt tired. Jon's letter. What it said. The letter arrived from Jon 3 days after the council session. Ned was still in King's Landing, managing the aftermath, the Tywin Lannister response, which was furious and measured in the Tywin way of containing fury for strategic deployment, the Cersei situation, which was contained and miserable and being managed with as much dignity as the circumstances allowed. The letter was from Jon. Jon had been in the Winterfell library. He had been in the Winterfell library for 3 months, absorbed in the project that Robb had described without fully understanding, reading history and lineage records and old accounts of the Targaryen dynasty with the Jon intensity that meant he had found something and was not letting go of it until he understood it completely. Ned knew why. Jon had been reading because Ned had restricted him from the wall and given him access to the library and told him to study governance and political history. He had been reading because that was what Jon did when he was given books and permission. He had been reading everything, including the lineage records that had been at Winterfell since the library was built, including the histories of the Tower of Joy, including the specific account of the battle at the Tower of Joy that had been written by the only other survivor of it, Howland Reed, and that had been in the Winterfell archives for 17 years, buried in the histories section under Reed family records, because Ned had put it there when Howland had insisted it be written down, and Ned had not been able to destroy it, and had not been able to display it. Jon had found the Reed account. The letter said, "Father, I have been reading. I found something I need to ask you about. Lord Reed's account of the Tower of Joy, the 3 Kingsguard who died there. What was inside the tower? What you brought back from it? Father, I need to know if what I think I'm reading is what it says. I need you to come home, or to write to me, or to answer me somehow. I've been carrying this for 2 weeks. I'm asking you now. Who was my mother?" Ned sat with the letter. He read it 3 times. He should have expected this. He'd had Jon in the library. He'd known what was in the library, Reed's account, sitting in the histories section for 17 years. He'd known Jon was reading. He should have thought further. Jon knew. Not everything. Enough to ask. And he had the right, had always had the right. He wrote back immediately. He wrote, "Jon, I'm coming home. Give me 3 weeks. There are things here that need settling before I can leave. What you found is real. What you suspect is real. Wait for me. Don't speak of it to anyone. Not Robb, not Catelyn, not Sir Roderick. Wait for me. I'll tell you everything." He sent the Raven. He spent the 3 weeks finishing everything he could finish and handing off everything that needed finishing to the people he trusted to finish it. He spent 3 weeks accelerating every process that was in motion: the Stannis succession documentation, the Littlefinger financial audit, the City Watch's new commander. He worked with the specific urgency of a man who had a son waiting at home who knew something, and who was 17, and who had been waiting for 3 months, and who deserved the truth. He left King's Landing on the morning of the 21st day. He rode north. Winterfell. The Godswood. What he told Jon. Jon was waiting for him at the gate. Not the household Jon, alone, with the quality of someone who had been watching for the arrival, and who had decided that the waiting should be done outside rather than inside. He was wearing the Stark grey, and he was 17, and he had the face that Ned had been looking at for 17 years, with the knowledge of what it carried, and that he was looking at now with a different quality, because Jon was looking back at him with the same knowledge, or the beginning of it. Ned dismounted. He handed the horse to a groom. He looked at his nephew. "Godswood," Ned said. Jon nodded. They walked. The Godswood at Winterfell was old. 8,000 years of stark prayers in the roots of the heart tree. The weirwood watching with its carved face the way it watched everything, without judgment, without comfort, simply presence. Ned had prayed here his whole life, and had never been sure anything answered, and had prayed anyway, because the Godswood was the place where the things that couldn't be said in the hall could be said. They sat by the pool. Jon said, "The 3 Kingsguard at the Tower of Joy were there because they were guarding a member of the royal family. That's what Kingsguard do. They guard the royal family. They don't guard towers in Dawn unless someone important is in the tower." He held the look. Lord Reed's account doesn't say who was in the tower. It describes the fight. It describes what you found afterward. It says you brought something back that you refused to name. Ned looked at the heart tree. He was always more careful than poetic, Ned said. Who was in the tower? Jon said. Ned held the pool's still surface. Your mother, Ned said. Lyanna Stark. My sister. The Godswood was very quiet. Jon sat with this. He was not surprised. Ned could see it. Jon had known from the moment he found the Reed account, and had been building around the knowing for 3 months. But knowing and being told were different, and being told was landing with its own weight, regardless. And my father, Jon said. Ned held the pool. Rhaegar Targaryen, Ned said. The name in the Godswood. The name that had not been spoken at Winterfell in 17 years. The name of the man who had died at the Trident, and whose death had built the world they lived in. Jon said nothing for a long time. They were married, he said. It was not a question. He had read the Reed account, and Reed's account, if you read it carefully, contained the specific detail that Ned had never fully confirmed to anyone, and that Reed had included in the document as historical record, without quite naming it as the thing it was. Yes, Ned said. Before you were born, the marriage was real. Which makes me... Jon stopped. Legitimate, Ned said. Yes. Aegon Targaryen, Jon said, the name in the Godswood. Ned looked at his nephew, at the face that carried the evidence of 2 dynasties. The Stark grey and the Targaryen something underneath it that he had never quite been able to name. He looked at the boy who had been a bastard his whole life, and who was now being told that the bastard part was a lie. I should have told you earlier, Ned said. I told myself it was for your protection. It was also for mine. Carrying the secret alone it was the burden I had agreed to carry, and I had carried it so long it had become part of me. He held Jon's gaze. I'm sorry. Jon held the look. He was very still. Not the Stark still. Something else. The still of a person whose architecture was being rebuilt. You raised me, Jon said. I know why you did what you did. You still deserve to know. Yes, a pause. I did. He looked at the heart tree. What do we do with it? Ned looked at the pool. He said, in King's Landing, I've established Stannis as Robert's heir. The succession is legally documented. Robert is alive. The realm is not at war. He held the gaze. If your parentage becomes known, it disrupts all of that. A legitimate Targaryen heir is a succession claim that is technically stronger than Stannis's by some readings of the law. It opens everything we've just closed. Jon held the look. So we keep it quiet, he said. That's one option, Ned said. What are the others? Ned was quiet. There is no clean other option, he said. There never has been. I've been living with that for 17 years. The truth of your parentage is politically explosive, regardless of when it comes out, or how carefully it's handled, because it touches the 2 most significant dynastic questions in the realm's recent history. He held the gaze. I am telling you because you have the right to know. What you do with the knowing, that is yours. Jon held the look for a long time. I don't want a throne, Jon said. I know. I'm Jon Stark. I've been Jon Stark my whole life. I know. Can't it just be something I know, and not something the realm knows? Ned looked at his nephew. He thought about what he had spent 4 months doing. He thought about the letters Jon had sent, the ones about the library, the history, the studying. He thought about what Jon had been doing in the library, while Ned had been dismantling Littlefinger's network and preventing Robert's death and building the legal succession case. Jon had been in the library finding the thing that could undo all of it, the one thread in the tapestry that, if pulled, changed the shape of the whole. He thought, and this is the moment I lose something. This is the Ned Stark price. Not my life, I kept my life. Not my children, I kept my children. Not the realm, I kept the realm. The thing I'm going to lose is the specific thing I came back to give Jon, which is a quiet life with a family that loves him, in the north, with the knowledge of who he is and without the weight of what it means, because the secret couldn't stay buried. He had known that the first time, and had hoped it would last until Jon was old enough to navigate it, and it had not lasted, and Jon had died beyond the wall and come back, and the knowing had eventually shaped everything anyway. He knew it now. Jon's parentage was going to become known. Not because he was going to announce it, because knowledge was like fire. It consumed what contained it. The Reed account existed. Jon knew. Ned knew. Howland Reed knew. And Varys, who had heard this time slip from Ned's mouth 3 months ago and who had been watching since. Varys, whose birds went everywhere, Varys knew. He had known almost before Ned. Varys knew everything. "It won't stay between us," Ned said. "I wish I could promise you otherwise." Jon held his gaze. "How long?" Jon said. "I don't know," Ned said. "Months. A year. Someone else has the information. I believe they've had it longer than you've had it. When they decide to use it how?" Jon said. "That depends on what they want," Ned said. "What the realm needs. What you choose to do before they decide for you." Jon looked at the heart tree. "You keep saying choose," he said, "but every option you're describing ends the same way. The secret comes out, and I have to deal with the coming out." "Yes, so what do I choose?" Ned held the pool's reflection of the heart tree. "You choose when," he said, "and you choose the shape it takes when it comes out, before or after, prepared or ambushed, from your mouth or someone else's." He held the gaze. "You can't choose whether, but you can choose how." Jon sat with this. The gods would, the heart tree watching, the pool and the weirwood's face in the water. "Give me time," Jon said. "As much as I can," Ned said. The months after. What peace looked like. There was a year. Ned had not expected a year. He had expected weeks, the information moving, the birds carrying it, Varys deciding that whatever strategic moment he had been waiting for had arrived. He had expected to be managing the fallout within a season. What he got was a year. Robert lived. The succession was Stannis's, and Stannis's management of the transition was exactly what Stannis's management of everything was: rigid, rigorous, unpopular in its detail, and correct in its execution. Cersei was at Casterly Rock because Robert had chosen not to execute her and had not been able to live with her presence either, and the compromise was the castle she had grown up in and her father's disapproval and her children visiting on schedules that the small council managed. Tywin Lannister had done nothing violent. This was the thing Ned had not fully predicted. Tywin's specific cold pragmatism in the face of a legally executed succession proceeding. There had been no war because Tywin had looked at the evidence and looked at Robert alive, and Robert supported by Stannis and the small council and the Kingsguard, and had calculated. The calculation had not produced acceptance. It had produced a specific patient fury that was not the same as war. Tywin was waiting. He was always waiting. Littlefinger was in the Vale and was managing Lisa Arryn and was, according to Jory's continuing surveillance, building something. Ned didn't know yet what he was building. It was smaller than what he had been building from inside King's Landing. But it was something. At Winterfell, the year had the quality of a held breath. Jon had told no one. He had gone back to the library and then to the practice yard, and then to the governance sessions that Ned had established. And he had been present in all of these, with the specific Jon quality of a person who was carrying a large thing and not putting it down, but not dropping it either. He had asked questions at dinner that were political questions, succession questions, questions about Targaryen history and Rhaegar and the rebellion, questions that he framed as a student's questions and that Ned answered as a scholar's questions, and that Catelyn noticed without knowing why she was noticing. Robb had not noticed. Arya had. "Jon is different," Arya said to Ned one afternoon in the yard. She was 11 and fierce, and had the Stark directness without the Stark restraint. "He's different since you came back. He was different before you came back. You both are." She held his gaze with the specific Arya gaze that was the child version of Catelyn's assessment, relentless and accurate. What happened? He's growing up, Ned said. That's not it, Arya said. He looked at his daughter. She had both her legs and both her eyes, and both her brothers, and she was not a list of names, and she was standing in the Winterfell yard, being difficult and exactly herself. And the sight of her being exactly herself was the thing that he had wanted most, and that was the hardest to look at directly. Some things change people, he said. Jon found something that changed him. What did he find? That's his to tell, Ned said. She held the look. Will he? Someday, Ned said. Will I need to know before someday? He looked at his daughter. Not yet, he said. She accepted this the way Arya accepted everything she didn't like, with the specific Arya acceptance that meant she had already decided to find out for herself. He watched her go back to the practice yard. He thought, she'll know before Jon decides to tell her. She'll figure it out. And Arya knowing will be manageable in a way that the South knowing is not, because Arya Stark's loyalty to her family was not a political position, but a fundamental property of her character, and fundamental properties did not shift for successions. The year held. Varys. How it came apart. The Raven came from King's Landing on a Wednesday morning in the 14th month. It was from Varys. The letter was brief. It said, Lord Stark, there is information in the capital that is no longer contained. I have managed it for 14 months. I can no longer manage it. The information will become public within the fortnight. You should prepare accordingly. I have done what I was able to do for what I believe are the right reasons, and I apologize that the right reasons were not sufficient. Ned sat with the letter. He had known this was coming. He had told Jon it was coming. He had lived in the year of grace, knowing it was a year and not more. He had used the year, not for the specific preparation he should have made, but for the things that couldn't be prepared for. The living, the family, the year of Bran having both his legs, and Jon knowing who he was, and Arya in the practice yard, and Catelyn watching him with the eyes that still saw more than he told her. He went to Jon. Jon was in the library. He looked up when Ned came in and saw Ned's face, and Ned did not need to say anything about the Raven. How long? Jon said. Fortnight, Ned said. Maybe less. Jon held the book in his hands. All right, he said. Jon. I said all right. He set the book down. I've been waiting for this for a year. He stopped. I've been thinking about what I want to say when it comes. I've been building it. He looked at Ned. I know what I want. Ned held his gaze. Tell me, he said. Jon told him. It was not what Ned had expected. It was more considered than he'd thought Jon would be, more patient, the product of a year of thinking rather than weeks of reaction. Jon had not been simply waiting in the library. He had been planning. Ned listened. When Jon finished, Ned sat with it for a long time. Then he said, I'll support whatever you decide. I know, Jon said. You always have. Not always, Ned said. For 17 years I kept this from you. You kept me alive, Jon said. That's not nothing. They held the gaze across the library table. You should tell Rob, Ned said, before it comes out. He deserves to hear it from you. I know. And Catelyn. I'll tell her too. Jon was quiet. She deserves it more than anyone. She's been cold to me for 17 years because she thought I was something I wasn't. She deserves to know what I actually am. Ned held his nephew's gaze. She'll feel guilty, Ned said. The coldness. She should, Jon said. And then, I know that's not kind. She did what she did for reasons I understand. But she should feel something about it. And then I'd like to get past it. Ned held the gaze. You're a better man than I was at 17, Ned said. You were fighting a war at 17, Jon said. I've been fighting one every day since, Ned said. Jon was quiet. So have I, Jon said. A different kind. He stood. He went to find Robb. Ned sat in the library and looked at the shelves of books. Howland Reed's account somewhere in those shelves, the thing that had unravelled a year of careful silence. And he felt the shape of what was coming, and he felt the year of Winterfell peace behind him, already becoming a different kind of memory. He had known it was coming. He had not fully known what losing it would feel like. It felt like this. Catelyn. What she did with the truth. Jon told Catelyn in the Solar. He told her alone. Not because Ned wasn't there, but because Jon had decided, with the Jon logic that was becoming more visible as he grew older, that this conversation was between himself and the woman who had raised him coldly for 17 years, and that the presence of Ned would give her a way to not fully look at Jon himself. Ned knew he'd been excluded. He accepted it. He heard the conversation later, not firsthand, from what Jon told him, and from what Catelyn told him, and from the specific difference between the two accounts that told him what had happened in the space between them. Catelyn had listened. She had listened to all of it. Lyanna, Rhaegar, the Tower, the marriage, the child that Ned had brought home and told her was his bastard. She had listened without interruption, which was not her usual style, and the not interrupting was itself information. When Jon finished, she had been quiet for a long time. Then she'd said, "I was cold to you." "Yes," Jon said. "For 17 years." "Yes. Because I believed." "I know what you believed," Jon said. She had asked, "Can you forgive me?" Jon had thought about it. He had actually taken the time to think about it rather than producing the immediate reassurance. And the taking of time was what Catelyn had found, she told Ned later, most affecting. That he hadn't rushed to make her feel better. That he had actually examined the question. "I think so," Jon said. "Not today, but I think so. In time." She had accepted this. She came to Ned that evening. She came to him in the Godswood, the place she came when she had something serious, the Sept being unavailable in Winterfell, and the Godswood serving the function of a place where the serious things could be said. "You lied to me," she said. "Yes," Ned said. "For 17 years. Yes." She held the night air between them. "I was cold to Lyanna's son," she said. "I was cold to Lyanna's legitimate son. I believed he was a bastard, and I was cold to him for it. And he wasn't even a bastard, and I was cold to him." Her voice had a specific quality, not quite grief, not quite rage, the thing that was both at once. "I spent 17 years being cold to the child of a dead woman who didn't ask to die. Cat, I'm not finished." She held the gaze. "I understand why you lied. I understand the necessity. I've been thinking about it all afternoon, and I understand the necessity of it, and it doesn't change the fact that you lied to me for 17 years, and I was cold to a child for 17 years because of it." She held the gaze. "That is the cost of the lie. That is what your secret produced. Jon Stark, Jon Targaryen, spent 17 years eating at a table in his own house, believing he deserved less than the other children, because you kept a secret." Ned held the look. There was nothing to say to this. It was true. All of it was true. "I know," he said. "Don't say I know," she said. "Don't say it like you already knew and absorbed it and filed it. Say something that doesn't already have a box for it." He held her gaze. He said, "I'm sorry." "For what, specifically?" "For every morning of his childhood that he ate at the table with the specific Catelyn distance between him and you, and for the fact that the distance was my doing, and I watched it happen, and told myself it was necessary, and necessary was right. She held his gaze. "And was it?" she said. "Yes," Ned said. "And no. Necessary and right aren't the same thing." She held the gaze. Something in her face, the Catelyn composure, the Tully training, the 17 years of managing this castle and these children and this marriage, held and then released, briefly, the way controlled things released briefly when the control had been complete enough for long enough. "Come inside," she said. "We need to plan." He went inside. He had been forgiven, he understood, in exactly the amount that forgiveness was going to be available, which was enough to continue and not enough to undo. He had known that too. Robb. What the knowing did to him. Robb received the news differently. He received it in the great hall, the two brothers together, Jon telling him the way he had told Catelyn, completely, with the Jon directness that was now threaded through with something older, the directness of a young man who had had a year to decide who he was and who had arrived at the decision. Robb listened. When Jon finished, Robb was quiet. He was 17, Ned's age at the Tower of Joy, Robert's age at the start of the rebellion, the specific age at which the world became large enough to crush you if it chose to. He sat in the great hall with the knowledge that his brother was not his bastard brother, but his cousin, and Targaryen, and legitimate, and technically the heir to a dynasty that the man he'd been raised to respect had helped destroy. He sat with it. Then he said, "Does this mean you have a claim?" "Technically," Jon said, "to the throne." "Yes." "Do you want it?" "No." Robb held the gaze. He was looking at Jon with the Robb look that he used when he was determining whether someone was telling him the truth, not suspicious, thorough. "All right," he said. Jon blinked. "You're my brother," Robb said. "Whatever the documents say, you're my brother. I've been your brother for 17 years. You telling me you're a Targaryen doesn't change that. It changes what people outside this castle might want to do about you, which is going to be a problem. But it doesn't change what you are to me." Jon was quiet. "It's going to become public," Jon said. "Varys, someone in King's Landing has the information. It's going to come out." "Then it comes out," Robb said. "And we deal with it from a position of already having told each other, which is better than being surprised by it." He held the gaze. "What does father want to do?" "He's left it to me," Jon said. "What to do with it?" Robb held the look. "And what do you want to do?" Jon held his brother's gaze. "I want to make the choosing mine," Jon said. "Not someone else's. I want to get ahead of the announcement and shape what it means rather than having other people shape it for me." He held the gaze. "I want to say publicly, before anyone else does, that I know who I am and that what I am is Jon Stark. That Ned Stark raised me, and I am his, regardless of blood, and that I have no interest in pressing a claim to anything the Targaryens lost." He held the gaze. "And I want to say it at court, in front of witnesses, before whoever is sitting on the information in King's Landing decides to use it as a weapon." Robb held the look. "That's good," Robb said. "It's what I've been building for a year," Jon said. "I know," Robb said. "I've been watching you build it. I didn't know what it was." He held the gaze. "When do you want to go south?" "As soon as father thinks it's ready," Jon said. "Then go find father," Robb said. "Tell him what you told me. He'll help you build the rest." Jon stood. At the door. "Robb." Robb looked at him. "Thank you," Jon said. "For the all right. You didn't have to make it that simple." "It's not simple," Robb said. "It's just the first part. The rest is going to be complicated." He held the gaze. "But you're my brother first. The rest is negotiable." Jon left. Robb sat in the great hall. He sat with his father's secret and his brother's revelation and the knowledge that the North was not what it had been an hour ago, and would be less what it had been when the South learned what Jon Stark actually was. He thought about what that meant. He thought about the Northern Lords who had sworn their swords to the Starks and who would look at a Targaryen in Stark clothing with northern suspicion of a North that had been burned by Targaryen fire once already. He thought about the lords who would see a legitimate claimant and decide their loyalty needed to adjust. He thought about the ones who wouldn't, who would stand with the Starks because Stark was who they were, and the ones who would hold the Targaryen name above the Stark upbringing, and what the split between them would look like. He thought, we're about to find out what the North is made of. He stood. He went to find Sir Roderick. The announcement. What Jon said. They rode to King's Landing in the winter. Jon, Ned, and Robb, with the household guard, with the specific pace of men who had a purpose rather than men who had a procession. They arrived at King's Landing in the 3rd week, and Ned went to Robert, and Robert received them, and the small council was convened in full session. Jon spoke. He had been preparing the speech for a year. He delivered it simply, without theatre, in the Jon voice that was not the voice of performance, but the voice of a man who had decided what he meant and was saying it. He said who he was. He named Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark and the Tower in Dorne and the marriage that Howland Reed had witnessed. He named the legitimacy. He acknowledged the claim. Then he said, I am Jon Stark. I have been Jon Stark for 17 years, and I will be Jon Stark for the rest of my life. The blood I carry does not change who raised me, or who taught me, or what I was taught, or what I will spend my life serving, which is the North, and this family, and the realm that Eddard Stark has spent his life protecting. He held the room. I have no claim I wish to press. I acknowledge Stannis Baratheon as the legitimate heir of Robert Baratheon's line. I acknowledge the Queen, whoever Robert's successor chooses, as sovereign of the 6 kingdoms. I ask only to be left to what I am, which is the son of the man beside me. He sat down. The room was very quiet. Robert looked at the boy across the table. He looked at Jon's face. He held the Robert expression that was not performing, the thing that was underneath the king, the man who had wept in a crypt, the man who had spent 15 years trying to make the winning worth something. He has his mother's eyes, Robert said, to no one specific, to the room. Yes, Ned said. Robert held the gaze. That's all he gets from her, Robert said. The rest is Stark. He looked at the table. I'll accept the statement as recorded, Stannis said. I have no dispute with it. The room was held in the moment that followed, the room of the small council of the 7 kingdoms, the people who managed the machinery of the realm, sitting with the knowledge of a boy who had named himself rather than let someone else do the naming. Ned looked at his nephew. He thought, this is the bravest thing. Not the Tower of Joy, and not the great Sept steps, and not the things I've done in this second life. This, standing in front of the most powerful people in the realm and naming yourself rather than letting them name you. This is what I raised. Jon was looking at him. He gave the small nod, the Stark nod. Jon nodded back. The North. What it cost. The North received the news, like the North received everything, in silence first, and then loudly. The silence lasted a week. The loudness lasted considerably longer. The Lords split the way Robb had predicted they would split, not cleanly, not along obvious lines, but in the specific way that Northern honour worked, which was by conviction rather than convenience. Lord Karstark held to the Starks without qualification. Lord Glover sent a letter that was technically supportive and substantively hesitant. Lord Manderley sent a letter that was enthusiastically supportive in a way that Ned found concerning, because Manderley's enthusiasm was specifically about the Targaryen heritage, which was not what Ned had been hoping for. Lord Serwyn refused to meet. This was the first real crack. A northern lord who had served the Starks for 3 generations, refusing to attend the meeting that Robb called to address the succession question. He sent his maester with a letter instead, and the letter said what the refusal of personal attendance communicated. He was not the right kind of loyalty anymore. Robb managed it. Ned watched Robb manage it with the pride and the grief that were becoming the 2-note sound of everything he watched his children do. Pride at what they were, grief at the cost of what they were becoming. Robb rode to Lord Serwyn. He sat at the man's table, and he ate his bread, and he talked for 3 hours. He came back without a commitment, but with the beginning of a conversation, which was what the situation could hold. The thing Ned had not fully anticipated was the free folk. Jon's statement had gotten north of the wall. Everything got north of the wall. The Rangers brought news, and the news moved freely in both directions, and the free folk understanding of a man who was fireblood and Stark-raised was different from the Northern Lord's understanding. The free folk had their own relationship with Targaryen history, which was no relationship. They had not bent the knee to the Targaryens any more than they had bent the knee to anyone else, and the revelation that Jon Stark was also Jon Targaryen had produced in the free folk communities around the wall a response that was somewhere between indifference and amusement. Jon Stark was still Jon Stark to them. He had spent a year building that. But Lord Glover was Lord Glover to his men, and Lord Serwyn was Lord Serwyn to his. And the northern political landscape was not the free folks' landscape, and the Lord's responses mattered in ways that the free folks didn't. The split was real, not a war, nothing that became a war, but a fault line. The North had been one thing mostly for Ned's whole life, the specific unity of a region that had survived the worst winters and the worst politics by being, above all else, loyal to its own. The revelation of Jon's parentage was not a split in the family. It was a split in the story the North told about itself, which was, we are Stark country. And now Stark country had a Targaryen in it, and some of the North's lords were finding the combination workable, and some of them were finding it uncomfortable, and some of them were finding it an opportunity. Littlefinger, in the Vale, was finding it an opportunity. Ned got that report from Jory in the 3rd month after the announcement. Littlefinger had been writing to Northern lords, not to Glover or Serwyn directly, to the men who served them, the household officials, the ones who moved in the spaces between lords and who were therefore less visible, but more pliable. He was not trying to start a war, he was trying to maintain a crack. Ned wrote to the Vale. He did not write to Littlefinger. He wrote to the Lord of the Eyrie, young Robin Arryn, whose health was fragile and whose guardians were Lysa Arryn's creatures, and therefore Littlefinger's creatures, but who was still technically the lord of a significant castle. He wrote carefully. He was always writing carefully now. Everything he did carefully, with the calculation that had not been there before he died, and that was there now so thoroughly that he could not remember what it had felt like to act without it. He was not who he had been. He had known this for a long time. Since King's Landing, since the boar hunt, since the succession session, since the things he had said and not said, and performed and managed. He had known it and had filed it in the same category as the other things that had to be accepted rather than contested. The specific version of himself that he mourned was not the version that had died on the Great Sept steps. That version had been too honest and too limited, and had ended too early. The version he mourned was older, the version that had never had to choose between what he was and what he needed to do, the version that had lived in Winterfell and been husband and father and lord, and had not been required to be anything else. That version was gone. He had killed it himself, somewhere between Winterfell and King's Landing, and the specific moment he had smiled at Cersei, with nothing behind the smile. The price. What the godswood saw. He went to the godswood in the second year. Not for prayer. He had stopped going to the godswood for prayer sometime in King's Landing, when the praying had started to feel like a conversation he was no longer equipped to have. He went because the godswood was the place where he had always gone when he needed to sit with something too large for rooms. He sat at the pool. He had saved his family. Bran had his legs. Jon was alive and named, and had spoken his own truth in front of witnesses, and had been allowed to choose who he was. Robb was learning to be a lord at his father's side, rather than in the middle of a war. Arya was in the practice yard. Sansa was at Winterfell, unmarried and 13, and not yet delivered to a prince who would become a monster. Robert was alive. The realm was not at war. He had done it. Everything he had come back to do, he had done. He sat at the pool, and he held the account of it, not the specific items, the aggregate. What it had cost in total, and the accounting was the thing he had been avoiding doing because the accounting was the thing that showed the price clearly. He was not who he had been. He was Ned Stark in the way that a house that had been rebuilt was still the house, the same structure, the same rooms, the same walls, but rebuilt, and rebuilt things were never quite the same as the original. He was Ned Stark who had smiled at Cersei and meant nothing by the smile. He was Ned Stark who had managed Robert instead of talking to him. He was Ned Stark who had given Catelyn the truth only when Jon had forced the issue, not when she had deserved to have it 17 years earlier. He had played the game. He had played it, and he had won it, which was more than the first Ned Stark had managed, and the winning had required becoming someone the first Ned Stark would not have recognized. The North was not torn apart. It was cracked. The crack would be managed. Robb was managing it already, with the patience that Ned had spent a year building into him through the governance sessions, the patience of a lord, rather than the passion of a boy. The crack would not become a fracture, but it was there. The thing that had been solid was not solid in the same way anymore, and the not being solid was Jon's truth coming into the world, which was both the right thing and the thing that cost. Every right thing had a cost. He had not fully believed this before he died. He had believed in right things, as ends that justified themselves. He believed it now, with the knowledge of someone who had paid. He sat at the pool, and he held what he was. He held the man who had been built from the one who had knelt on the steps and who had woken, gasping in his own bed, and who had spent 16 months becoming something that could win the game that the first version of him had lost. He held it. The heart tree watched. The pool was still. He thought about his children. He thought about Jon in King's Landing, finding his footing in the specific way Jon always found his footing, slowly, quietly, then completely. He thought about Robb learning to hold the North together with the patience of a man twice his age. He thought about Arya terrorizing the Yard with a wooden sword, and about Sansa finding her feet in the social architecture of Winterfell, and about Bran, who had both his legs, who was studying the ravens and the maps and the histories of the North, who was becoming something that Ned could not fully predict. He thought about what he was going to tell Catelyn when he came back inside. He thought, the truth. All of it. What I did and why, and what it cost, and what I am now. She has asked for it for 16 months. She has earned it. And if I carry this alone for the rest of whatever years I have, I will carry it until it hollows me out completely. And she has always been the thing that kept me from being hollowed. He stood from the pool. He walked back through the godswood. He went inside. He found her in the solar. He sat across from her. He said, "I need to tell you something." She set down the letter she was reading. She looked at him with the 17 years of his face that she knew. She said, "I know you do. I don't know how to start," he said. "Then start at the beginning," she said. "I'll wait." A moment. He started at the beginning. Catelyn. The full account. He told her everything. Not in one night. It took 3 evenings in the solar after the children were in bed, the fire going, the castle around them in its evening quiet. He told it from the beginning. The execution, the great sept, the gasping in the dark, the specific moment of understanding that he was alive and in his own bed, and that it was the morning before Robert's procession. She listened to all of it. She listened without interrupting, which was her way, when the thing being said was too large for interruption. She held the cup, and she looked at the fire, and she listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You came back," she said. "Yes." "From death?" "Yes." "And you carried it for 16 months without telling me?" He looked at the fire. "Yes," he said. She held the cup. "Why are you telling me now?" she said. "Because I'm diminishing," he said. He had not planned to say it this way. It arrived honest, which was appropriate. "I told myself I was keeping it to protect you, and that was partly true. I was also keeping it because the carrying was the only thing making me feel like I was still myself. The carrying was the last thing I had, that the version of me who came back didn't have to perform." She held the cup. "And now," she said, "now the carrying is too heavy," he said. "And I'm not sure there's a version of myself in here that deserves to keep something this large from you. Not after everything you've been patient about." She was quiet. The fire. "You went to King's Landing knowing what you were going to find," she said. "Knowing about Cersei. About Littlefinger." "Yes. And you could have told me. I could have helped." "I know." "Then why?" "Because I loved the first version of you that didn't know this," he said. "And I knew that the moment you knew it, it would change you. The way it changed me. And I didn't." He stopped. "I wanted you to have as long as possible, being the person you were before any of it was yours to carry." She was very still. "That was not your decision to make," she said. "No," he said. "It wasn't." She set the cup down. She looked at him. He looked back. 17 years of looking at each other. The specific 17 years of a marriage that had not started as love and had become love through the particular alchemy of shared difficulty and shared purpose, and shared children, and shared table and shared bed. The love that was not the love of songs, but was more durable than the love of songs, because it was built from the lived thing rather than the imagined one. "You kept me human," she said, "while you were becoming something else." "I tried," he said. "You succeeded." She held his gaze. "For 16 months you kept me out of it, and I remained myself while you were changing, becoming whatever this is." She held the gaze. "Is that what you intended?" "Partly," he said, "and partly I was selfish." "Yes," she said. "You were." A long quiet. "Do you want to know what I think?" she said. "Yes." "I think you came back from death as yourself," she said. "I think you spent 16 months becoming someone else so that yourself would survive. And I think the person you are now is not the person you were before. But it is still..." She held the gaze. "It is still the person I married. underneath whatever this is. The underneath is still you. He held her gaze. The underneath is wearing thin, he said. Then let me carry it with you, she said. Starting now, no more soul carrying. Whatever comes from here, we carry it together. He held the gaze. He thought about what he had been, and what he had become, and what the next version would be. The one that had Catelyn in it as a full partner rather than a protected observer. He thought about what that would produce, and what it would cost her. He said, "Are you certain?" "I have been waiting 16 months to be asked," she said. He held her gaze. "All right," he said. "Starting now," she said. "Starting now." What if Ned Stark was reborn with all his memories? He came back the same man. He was Ned Stark when he gasped into consciousness in his own bed at Winterfell on the morning before Robert arrived. He was Ned Stark with 17 years of knowledge pressed into the architecture of his character, knowledge of betrayal, of what Littlefinger was and what Cersei did, and what his oldest friend's worst habits would produce. He was the same man. He walked into the practice yard the same way. He held his children the same way. He held the same values and the same code, and the same fundamental belief that some things were right and some things were wrong, and the difference between them was not negotiable. And then he started to do what needed doing. He kept Bran from the tower. He built the case against Cersei with scholarship and testimony, and the patient methodology of a man who had learned, in dying, that passion was not enough. He removed Littlefinger from the board by becoming the thing he had always refused to become, the player who understood that the game was real even when he wished it weren't, who used knowledge as the weapon that was more precise than a sword. He told Robert the truth in the specific sequence and with the specific preparation that gave the truth the best chance of landing without burning. He saved the realm. He saved his family. Bran kept his legs. Robb kept his head. Sansa kept her freedom. Arya kept her name. Jon knew who he was. Robert was alive. And Ned Stark was not. Not entirely. Not in the specific sense. The man who had come back from death in his own bed was still there. Catelyn could see him, could put her hand on his chest in the evenings and feel the same heart she had put her hand on for 17 years. The heart was the same. What surrounded the heart was different. He had smiled at Cersei. He had managed Robert. He had kept his wife ignorant for 16 months because he had decided she needed protecting from what he was doing. He had lied. Not the one specific lie he had carried for 17 years, the lie about Jon, but many smaller ones, the lies of omission, the lies of performance, the lies that were not lies if you didn't examine them closely, and were very clearly lies if you did. He had lied the way the court lied, the way the game required its players to lie, with the practiced ease of a man who had decided that the outcomes justified the methods. And the outcomes were good. The outcomes were everything he had come back for. And he was not the man who would have made them. The man who made them was someone who had learned, at the cost of dying, that honor without strategy was honor without consequence. That right things required right methods, and that right methods sometimes required him to be something less than what right methods should require. That the game could be won by a man who played it well enough, and that playing it well enough had a price, and that he had paid it. The North was cracked, but not broken. The lords who had held Starks above everything were now holding the concept of a Targaryen Stark, and most of them were managing the concept. And the ones who weren't were being managed by Robb, who was already becoming the lord his father had hoped he'd become, without needing to become it through the specific education of grief. Jon was finding who he was, not quickly. Jon did nothing quickly, but in the direction of someone who had named himself, who had stood in the small council and spoken plainly and come home to the North, and was learning to hold the North the way Starks had always held the North, which was, from inside it, not above it. Catelyn knew. She was carrying it with him now, the full weight. And the carrying was changing her too. He could see it in the mornings, the sharpening, the woman who had always been formidable acquiring a new kind of attention. She was learning what he had learned. He was watching her learn it. He was not going to spare her from the learning because she had told him plainly that she did not want to be spared. He sat in the godswood in the evenings sometimes. He sat at the pool, and he held what he was, and he looked at the heart tree. He had told Lyanna he was going to do it differently. He had done it differently. He was alive. His children were alive. His oldest friend was alive. The realm was not on fire. The specific catastrophe he had been sent back to prevent had not arrived. He had done it. The thing he had lost in the doing was not dramatic. It was not a clean loss, not a limb or an eye or a person. It was more like the specific change in a landscape after a long rain, the same geography, the same hills and rivers and trees, but the light falling differently, the ground having absorbed something and given it back as a different quality of terrain. He was the same landscape. He was Ned Stark. He held his wife's hand in the evenings. He watched his children grow. He sat in the godswood and looked at the heart tree and felt the specific tiredness of a man who had done the work, and who would do it again tomorrow, and who would keep doing it for as long as the work required doing, because that was what he was. Not the Ned Stark of the first life, not the player he had become in the second. Something in between. Something that held both. The Lord who held the values and the man who understood that values, without the strategy to protect them, were simply intentions, and that the difference between intentions and outcomes was the willingness to do the difficult thing. He was willing. He was very tired. He was willing. The heart tree watched him. The pool reflected the weirwood face back at itself. The north was quiet. Winter had not come yet. But it was coming. And this time, someone would be ready for it.